Chapter 166. This hidden scoreboard would not be revealed until the end of the MBO entrance test. 00:19. Everyone looked ready from their various positions. They stared at the green ball of light ahead with a look of determination. God Eyes has been activated. Gustav stared at the ball of light from his position but couldn't find any energy points on them, which surprised him a little. Even when he tried zooming in on sighting the ball of light, it was still extremely far away from his current position. The distance must be the reason why I can't see its energy points. From the previous rumors I heard, the MBO entrance test takes longer than a day to be finished. If the rumors are true, it might take more than a day to get to the light. Is this why this is an endurance test? Gustav wondered as he stared at the countdown. 00:03, 00:02, 00:01, 00:00. Second phase will now commence. Immediately the countdown was up, everyone started racing towards the green ball of light. Some conserved their energy and moved at a fair pace because they remembered Gradier's Zenatus mentioning that the test was related to endurance. They had no idea of the situations they would be facing. To be on the safe side, they decided to conserve their energy for any unforeseen circumstances that may arise. Some felt that getting to the light first would be good because of the hidden scoreboard that was mentioned by Gradier's Zenatus. They were sure that being the first to get to the light would give them a good number of points. Gustav stood in the same position after the countdown had started and looked around. I still can't use my full abilities because there are invisible cameras everywhere. They must be watching from a secret room or something. It's not the time to reveal any of my abilities even though they probably know my grade by now, Gustav said and proceeded to squat slightly. Thwom. He dashed forward with speed, crossing over 200 feet in a single body movement. Gustav was currently moving at his average speed. However, his speed was still much faster than many mixed bloods taking part in the test. His hair blew backward as his body traveled with speed across the patch of grass. Floor 617, Watchroom. Inside the room filled with screens that displayed different participants within the white space, Gradier's Zenatus stood in front as usual. They watched as the participants moved towards the light. There are some really promising candidates with unique bloodlines this year. His eyes moved from place to place across the screens. One of the participants with electric green scales on his face zapped across the place in a particular screen, moving at a fair pace. His movement was like teleportation. Electricity would appear several feet in front of him, and he would transform into it. This kept happening throughout. He can move faster, but he seems to be one of those conserving their energy, Gradier's Zenatus thought. Bring up the information on this participant. Gradier's Zenatus voiced out while pointing at that part of the screen. One of the officials behind nodded and tapped on the holographic keyboards several times. Truant. A new holographic screen appeared out of thin air in front of Gradier's Zenatus. He stared at the information and nodded. B grade. Not bad, he said internally and proceeded to wave his hand. The holographic screens disappeared, and he stared at the other screens. On another screen, he noticed a short girl with black ram horns and the lower part of a serpent squirming across the ground with speed. As she was moving across the ground, the green patches of grass were turning into a trail of ashes with the outline of her body displayed on it. Her bloodline ability doesn't make her very mobile, but there's a chance that she might surprise us when the Real challenges come inside the room. A large number of screens that were over 1,000 showed all the participants' movement. Despite the number of screens, Gradier's Zenatus was able to watch every single one of them at the same time and notice the promising participants. These three are really good too, Gradier's Zenatus commented and had 3 enlarged holographic screens appear in front of him. The first one was a 5-foot-tall boy with achy-colored shoulder-length hair and 2 red lines extending from his forehead to his left eyebrow. He was moving across the patch of grass with intense speed, causing a red streak to blaze across the place. Although his bloodline had not been revealed yet, Gradier's Zenatus felt he was promising enough from what he had seen. The second was a green-skinned girl with a brown whip-like tail that had red ore-like energy cover her entire body. She was currently on a red 4-feet sickle made out of energy. The sickle flew above the patch of grasses, giving her enough mobility to move as she pleased. The third person on the screen was a tall boy with spiky orange hair. Surprisingly, this boy wasn't walking or running above the playing fields like everyone else. Instead, he was moving underground. How he arrived underneath the ground was unknown, but he stood in one spot and folded his arms with a wide grin on his face. The ground was moving him forward without him having to do anything. This three should be the most promising candidates here except for that boy that led the other batch here. His information shows that his bloodline has something to do with transformation. Still, he hasn't made use of that, Gradier Xanatus said while staring forward with a look of contemplation. I guess we shall soon see how they perform when they meet the first challenges, he said internally while waving his hand. The participants kept moving towards the green ball of light for the next 3 hours. Some of them noticed that the ball wasn't getting any closer even after increasing their speed. They had been expecting some kind of challenge, but even after moving for another hour, nothing happened. Some of them were already running out of stamina after 6 hours passed by. The green ball of light was still very far away. Some of them decided to rest while others kept moving forward. Looks like some of them have let down their guards now, Gradier Xanatus said internally while watching the participants on the screens. Release the mobicles, he commanded with a loud voice. Chapter 167. It looks like some of them have let down their guard, Gradier Xanatus said internally while watching the participants on the screens. Release the mobicles, he commanded with a loud voice. Within the test location, the participants suddenly paused whatever they were doing when they sensed something. VRRMM. 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 Openings were formed high above the ground. It looked like the space was torn open, forming circular blue tunnels in the air. Swee-eye. 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 Baby palm-sized blue machines started raining down from above. These small machines were spherical and had very smooth surfaces. Thousands of them were dropping from the sky. Everyone was surprised at the sudden development. The group of participants that sat down to rest were about to jump to their feet when the ground started quaking. DHMMM. GHRMM. Most mixed bloods lost their footing, but surprisingly they didn't fall. They didn't fall because the grass below their feet had grown in length and coiled around their legs without most participants realizing what was going on. When this was happening, some participants noticed it and found a way to protect themselves while others didn't. The participants that the plants grabbed made use of their bloodline abilities to free themselves from the grip of the plants. However, in the process of doing that, the weird spherical machines falling from above made contact with the ground. SKRYHH. The ground split open in different places. Immediately contact was made. Kairar. Screams rang out as several participants fell into the openings on the ground after they finished escaping from the entanglement of the plants. Some were unable to free themselves from the entanglement and were thrown into the plant's openings. Due to the unique chain of events, more mixed bloods were disqualified at this point. Those who could escape the cracks and opening points on the floor moved to a safer spot. They stared at the landscape ahead with a look of bewilderment. The spherical machines glowed green before burrowing into the ground and disappearing. Right before their very eyes, the structure of the entire landscape started changing. Small golden-colored rivers began to appear ahead, along with mountains and trees. Some grass patches became bigger and taller. The grasses with sentience started thrashing around all in a bid to grab the nearby participants. A sky also suddenly appeared high above. The participants could see clouds with their blue color, but the yellow sun was missing. In place of the sun, the participants could only see the green ball of light they were supposed to follow. Everything in the space looked so real that it could be compared to normal outdoors. The only differences that the participants could spot were the golden rivers and the green ball of light that replaced the sun. The outlook of the entire landscape had gone through an unbelievable transformation. I knew getting to the blue light wasn't going to be as easy as they were making it out to be, Gustav muttered while observing his surroundings. He stood at the top of a small 30-meter-tall rock and stared at the landscape ahead while activating God's eyes. The changes were caused by those machines. Such immense energy, able to transform the environment to whatever the embryo wishes for it to be, Gustav said as he furrowed his eyebrows. The rock he was currently standing on wasn't there at first. It also came into existence after the spherical machines rained down from the sky. Gustav was also surrounded by plants that tried to hold him down, but he destroyed them easily. When the rock sprouted out of the ground, he leaped onto it to check the vicinity from a higher point. He was able to see the high amount of energy points each machine had, and he determined after an observation that the little machines caused the change. It looks like it was not only the surface structure that changed. Things just got a little more interesting, Gustav said with a smile on his face. Several thousand meters ahead of his standing point, Gustav could see a small forest that had blue and yellow trees. What a good cover-up, Gustav said while staring ahead. They were still very far from his position, but he was able to see the trees and what awaited within. Gustav jumped down from the rock and dashed forward with speed. He had no intention of avoiding the forest. If Gustav wanted to travel around the forest, he would have to turn left or right. But since the start of the second phase, he hadn't changed trajectory as everyone did. Everyone traveled in a straight line because they felt that changing trajectory would increase the time it would take for them to reach the green ball of light. Gustav felt that everyone was probably transported to positions where they only had to keep moving forward to get to the ball. Turning towards the left or right would mean you were traveling in the wrong direction, but that didn't mean you couldn't get back on track by simply turning to face the large glowing ball in the distance. Swoosh! Gustav arrived within the forest in a few seconds and streaked past the yellow and blue trees. The forest was so dense that the leaves from different trees formed large canopies that covered the entire region, causing the vicinity to look dark blue and yellow due to the color of the trees. Shwai! A circular blade with numerous spikes on its edges suddenly flew across the air towards Gustav's chest from up a tree 13 feet away. Due to the number of leaves covering the tree, this blade was well concealed and wouldn't be noticed until it was about 3 feet away from making contact. Swerve! Gustav moved his body towards the side. Immediately the blade was sent out, dodging it with ease. As the blade traveled past him, it was in fairly slow motion from his point of view. He could see it clearly as it traveled forward. It was as big as a person's head, blue with a yellow light beeping on its surface. Gustav stretched out his hand and grabbed the blade, hindering its movement. Grip! His strong grip on the blade stopped it spinning immediately. Gustav quickly spun around and flung the blade back to the direction it was sent from. Chapter 168. His firm grip on the blade stopped it spinning immediately. Gustav quickly spun around and flung the blade back in the direction it was sent. SKKRHHH. A loud metallic screeching sound rang out from up ahead. Boom! A small explosion rocked the trees a few feet ahead. A big branch of a tree was severed in two, and it fell to the ground along with a blue humanoid-looking machine. The left shoulder area down to the chest and the sides of its rib melted off. Gustav dashed out in a bid to finish it off the moment it landed on the ground. However, the instant he moved forward, he heard the sound of air being sliced apart due to objects moving at high speed across it. Gustav turned around and noticed 3 out of 4 similar-looking blades heading towards him from the left, right, and center. Tom! Gustav immediately leaped upwards to dodge all the projectiles. As his body ascended into the air, the spinning blades passed below him, but to his surprise, they stopped moving forward. The blades turned and headed for his body while he was still in mid-air. Gustav noticed another one headed for him from behind, bringing the total count of the blades to 5. Swirl! Gustav suddenly spun his body repeatedly in mid-air and swung out his leg towards the first 3 blades that arrived in front of him. Bam! 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 Gustav's leg accurately slammed into the body of the 3 blades. His leg made contact with the surface of the blades, sending them flying into the distance again. As they moved through the air, several branches were cleaved in 2 before the blades embedded themselves into 3 different trees up ahead. Due to the swinging of his leg, his body still spun towards the back, and he reached out his hand to grab the remaining 2 blades flying towards him. Clench! Clench! He landed with both blades in his hands and wanted to swing them out again when he noticed the blinking of yellow light speed up. Beep! Beep! Boom! Both of them exploded together, causing a radius of over 16 feet to be engulfed in fire. Smoke spread across the environment, but the silhouettes of 5 humanoid-looking blue machines could be seen walking towards the point of explosion. They had glowing yellow lines on their arms and looked menacing. Earlier on, their arms had been stretched out towards Gustav's position. Still, after the explosion, they didn't seem to be on guard anymore. Scanning environment for signs of life. A robotic voice was heard from one of them as rays of red and green light in the form of a net shot out. But immediately that happened, a silhouette dashed out of the smoke towards it. Signs of life, dis. Before the robotic voice could complete its sentence, a tightly clenched fist drilled into the middle of its chest. KRYYSHH. A small circular object blasted out from the back of the hole created in the machine's chest. Troyan. The glowing lines on its body dimmed immediately. The smoke cleared up, and Gustav's straight-looking face was revealed. He neither had injuries, nor did he look ruffled in any way. Swoosh. Gustav withdrew his fist from the chest of the humanoid machine and dashed towards the left, dodging a green energy beam that was shot towards him from behind. He arched his arm backwards as he arrived in front of the humanoid machine on the left and threw it upwards. Bang! His fist collided with its jaw, causing it to be flung into the air. Gustav didn't wait for a single second before swinging out his fist repeatedly. Bam! 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 While still being suspended in midair, Gustav's fist rained down upon the body of the humanoid machine, blasting apart several of its metallic body parts. Bang! The humanoid machine slammed into a tree on the other side, causing its body to break into bits and pieces. Gustav had already dashed towards the side again after successfully launching that attack. Swerve. 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 Gustav was moving at 200 feet per second, so dodging the shots of the humanoid machines was really easy for him. His body moved across the place in a zigzag manner. He arrived in front of another humanoid machine and rained down barrages of punches on it. Bam! 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 In about a minute, Gustav was done dealing with every single humanoid except for the first one. All the ace that fought with Gustav either lost one of their body parts or had their cores taken from their body, so their functions had shut down. Gustav gathered the cores and placed them in his storage device. Extra energy is always appreciated, he said internally as he walked towards the AI he didn't finish off. Participant 00126 can proceed. A robotic voice boomed out from the AI that Gustav hadn't killed. Gustav nodded and dashed forward while throwing his arm out. Bang! His arm tore through the chest of the AI, and he grabbed onto its core before pulling it out with force. I won't pass up on free energy, he said internally as the glow on the AI's body dimmed as it fell to the ground. When the system absorbs the cores, the energy needed for the next upgrade will be reduced to a quarter, Gustav thought while storing the core in his storage device. Swoosh! He dashed forward after all was said and done, leaving the AIs in scraps. Gustav leaped to the top of a tree and started jumping from tree to tree after crossing a distance of 700 feet. Floor 617, Watchroom. Gradier Zenatus stared at a particular screen at the top left corner of the holographic split screens. His eyes were laced with a look of disbelief and uncertainty. Did that candidate just casually deal with a bunch of level 6 AIs without even activating his bloodline? The shock in his voice was evident. Chapter 169. Did that candidate just casually deal with a bunch of level 6 AIs without even activating his bloodline? The shock in his voice was evident. He stared at other holographic screens, trying to see if he missed any other candidate that may have displayed the same prowess Gustav did. However, after checking for a long time, he couldn't find anything of sorts. Most participants on the screen were struggling to deal with the AIs with their bloodline being activated. Contrary to other participants, Gustav dealt with 5 AIs by only using brute force. Level 6 AIs were comparable to Step 2 Zulu rank mixed bloods. So, it was understandable that the mixed bloods were having problems defeating them. Although, most mixed bloods participating had surpassed the Step 2 rank. Still, it would be challenging to defeat multiple level 6 AIs within a specific period without taking damage. According to the scans, his bloodline should be related to transformation. How is he able to use this level of strength without transforming? Gradier Zenatus thought. Bring up the information on that candidate. Gradier Zenatus pointed at the screen that showed Gustav dashing across the forest. Truant. Another holographic screen appeared in front of him that displayed Gustav's personal information. His name, address, date of birth, and so many other things were displayed. Gustav Crimson. Gradier Xanatus muttered with a weird look on his face, wondering why something about this name felt familiar to him. His eyes suddenly widened as he noticed a piece of information. His birth parents are the Oslovs? He voiced out with a look of disbelief and confusion. Another prodigy from the Oslov family. Do they have 3 kids? Because Indrik Big Brother was said to have a low-grade bloodline. I wonder why this one didn't catch the eyes of the inspectors. A mixed blood of this caliber should have passed the special test. Gradier Xanatus thought while being puzzled at the new information he uncovered. Why does he bear the name Crimson if his original family is the Oslovs? A giant screen was placed in front of a hall, and several young people dressed in pure white uniform-like outfits sat on chairs opposite the screen. Most of these youngsters gave off a confident and prideful vibe, as they all watched the screen in front with contemplative looks. A glass wall could be seen on the right side of the hall. Through the glass wall, clouds could be seen, which depicted that the current altitude of this location was very high. On the front seat, a boy with curly black hair dressed like the others sat with his legs crossed. Among all the others, he seemed to be the youngest because of his looks. He had a conflicted look on his face as he stared at the screen ahead. What's the problem, Indrik? You've been acting weird since we arrived at the hall. Are you sick? A girl with long blonde hair beside him voiced out with a concerned look on her face while stretching out her hand to touch his face. Pa, don't touch me, he voiced out with a repressed look while slapping her hand away from his face. She withdrew her hand immediately but still kept facing him. Indrik kept gritting his teeth as he stared at a particular part of the screen. She noticed this and followed his line of sight to check out what he was staring at. On a particular part of the screen, a tall boy with dirty blonde hair had just exited a small forest and was now headed towards the mountain pass up ahead. Why do you two look so identical? She asked with a suspicious gaze. None of your bus. Before Indrik could complete his sentence, someone interrupted from the side. Isn't that your big brother? A boy sporting short brown hair asked while pointing at the screen. Indrik's big brother? The girl voiced out with a surprised look and turned back to stare at the screen. No wonder, she said internally. What do you mean by big brother? Indrik's face suddenly twisted in rage as he stared at the person on his right-hand side. The space around Indrik suddenly warped and twisted. Ugh. The boy beside him suddenly fell to the ground on his knees. At Rio you doing? He stuttered while asking as his body trembled. Other people in the hall were confounded by the sudden turn of events and stared at the front with a dumbfounded look. He is no brother of mine, Indrik voiced out loudly, causing the space to twist even more. The boy felt heavy pressure descend upon him, causing his entire body to be forcefully pinned to the ground. Plop. Indrik, stop it. The girl on his left voiced out. Shut up. Just because you managed to pass the special test doesn't mean you're on the same level with me. Indrik voiced out with a prideful look, causing the girl to flinch back, speechless. He turned to face the boy who was struggling to move on the ground. Watch your words next time, fool, he said before turning around to leave the hall. The boy on the ground felt the air return to normal, and his body lightened up again. He slowly stood up while gasping for breath with a look of embarrassment visible on his face. Chatter, chatter, chatter. Teat. He's so full of pride at such a young age. He is a special class. That's to be expected. None of the special class showed up here to watch the test except for him. I can't believe he has a brother. The silent hall became a little noisy after what had happened. The girl who tried stopping Indrik earlier helped the other boy up. I can't believe Indrik did that to me. I was his senior for years, he voiced out after sitting down. Gerg, don't be mad at him, she said with a pleading look. You're always supporting him, Paula. Yet he treated you like shit, Gerg said with a look of pity. I don't, she stuttered, not knowing what to say. Chapter 170. Gerg, don't be mad at him, she said with a pleading look. You're always supporting him, Paula. Yet he treated you like shit, Gerg said with a look of pity on his face. I don't, she stuttered, not knowing what to say. I can't believe Gustav is participating in the test. He seems to be doing well also. What's going on? Gerg asked while staring at the screen. Indrik stood on a corridor with a sliding floor surface. The floor was moving him forward across the corridor. This time, Gustav, I promised to finish you off for the humiliation you brought me, he said internally with a look of rage. 8 hours had already gone by since the second phase of the test started. The participants were still following the green light, which looked as far as ever. However, those that had traveled farther than others could tell that they had closed the distance a little. More than 100 participants had been eliminated by AIs that suddenly spawned all around the place. Another thing was, the AIs within each area were different. To pass a particular location, a participant would have to go through one trouble or the other. Nevertheless, whenever they managed to surpass such obstacles and travel past that region successfully, they would notice a specific change. The green ball of light had become a little closer than it was earlier. In a region of large mountains, Gustav was currently running along a mountain pass. The current mountain Gustav scaled through was huge, and on the right side, the mountain pass was located. At the edge, several spiky large bones could be seen at the bottom, pointing upwards. The large spiky bones were lined up at the bottom of the mountain, densely packed together. If one was to fall off the edge of the mountain pass, they would meet with a disastrous end. The mountain pass was about 16 feet wide. Gustav ran across the mountain pass with his eyes glowing a bright green and scarlet color. He furrowed his eyebrows as he noticed something 900 feet away. Swoosh! He crossed over 700 feet in about 3 seconds and leaped upwards once he crossed 800 feet. Thump! His body was lifted into the air by more than 100 feet while moving forward like a rocket. Bam! He landed several hundred feet ahead and kept running forward. Thanks to God Eyes, I have avoided many traps within this mountain pass, Gustav said internally while running. When he first got to the mountain pass after moving through the forest, he activated a trap mechanism by mistake. He was nearly pushed to the bottom of the mountain because of that error. Since then, he had been making use of God Eyes while passing through. He had been running for about 2 hours and had successfully crossed 3 mountain ranges. His energy was depleting at a fast rate due to the continuous use of God's Eyes. Still, he wanted to make sure he crossed the mountain region before deactivating it. Gustav could already see the end of this mountain pass from his current location. One more mountain region to go, Gustav said internally. He could already see the next mountain in the distance, which was way taller than the mountain he was currently scaling through. I wonder if it will also get dark in this artificial space when the day comes to an end, Gustav said internally as he kept traveling forward. He could tell that it was getting close to evening in the real world. Just as he had guessed, the test was going to take more than a day. After a few more minutes of running, Gustav was closing in on the end of the mountain pass when he noticed something again. Buru, 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 buru. Massive boulders suddenly started rolling down from the top left area of the mountain with intense speed. Unlike the last time he encountered a trap, his reaction time was slow because he didn't activate the current trap. More than 30 of them, each the size of a truck, rolled down with intensity, causing tremors across the mountain range. Parts of the mountain crumbled and slid down the mountain pass. Due to the intense vibrations, the large boulders generated as they rolled down, Gustav's speed was affected slightly. The boulders were all rolling down simultaneously, but the first one was about 100 feet away from Gustav, while the last one was more than 6,000 feet away. The boulders were over 30 in number. Their sheer sizes were more than enough to destroy the path ahead and hinder Gustav's progress. Sprint has been activated. Gustav activated Sprint, and his speed instantly doubled. The boulders rolling down decreased in speed from his point of view as he threw his body forward with force. Flumsh! Afterimages were created from his body movement as he crossed over 500 feet in a second, surpassing the first 7 boulders before they smashed into the route behind him. In the next second, he crossed 1,000 feet. The 13 boulders left in front of him were several feet away from making contact with the mountain pass ahead. Gustav's eyebrows furrowed as he leaped upwards and landed on top of the boulder 70 feet away from him. Tum! He pushed his knees upwards the instant he landed on it, propelling his body forward once again. Bang! Due to the force his legs generated, the upper part of the boulder blasted apart as Gustav leaped off it. Gustav's body traveled in midair, leaping past 7 more boulders. He dodged a particular one that nearly slammed into his head since it was still rolling down from above. Unfortunately, as Gustav's momentum was coming to an end, the last 5 boulders were already making contact with the mountain pass ahead. Gustav landed back on the route the same time the 5 boulders ahead smashed into the mountain pass. Boom, 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 boom. It sounded like a nuclear explosion as the boulders slammed vigorously into the road ahead. Chapter 171. Boom, 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 boom. It sounded like a nuclear explosion as the boulders slammed vigorously into the road ahead. Cracks appeared all over the path ahead as it crumbled and started sliding down the mountain. Over 1,000 feet of the mountain pass ahead was destroyed, leaving a large gap. Nevertheless, Gustav kept on running. Immediately, he got to the edge where the route stopped. He bent his knees slightly with intense force. Super jump has been activated. Thump. Gustav pushed himself upwards with force. Swee-eye. His body traveled forward above the wide gap formed from the destruction of the mountain pass. He could see the pointy bone-like objects below him as his body traveled in an arc through the air. Zwarnen. He successfully leaped over the 1,000 feet gap and landed at the other side of the mountain pass. Thump. His feet made contact with the ground a few feet away from the edge behind him. Gustav raised his body back up with a straight face after landing on the other side. Good thing I was able to get super jump to increase in level, Gustav said internally as he turned around to look back. It was indeed an intimidating sight. The entire mountain pass, as far as the eyes could see, had been destroyed by the large boulders that rained down a few moments ago. Looking down, the deep crater could bring about the fear of death. However, Gustav was not scared of looking at the bottom that was currently more than 10,000 feet away. If someone couldn't fly, they had to either jump or walk across the straight surface of the mountain on the left. Jumping was impossible because there was now a gap of over 7,000 feet. Only a mixed blood that could walk on walls could cross the area as a last resort. What would happen if I had fallen? Would the MBO let the participants get killed when they failed to surpass a particular region? Gustav wondered whether the MBO had a way of preventing deaths when participants fail to overcome dangerous situations. He decided not to overthink it and turned around to keep walking. The end of this particular mountain pass was only a few feet away. After passing through the current mountain pass, he would only need to overcome one more mountain before traveling beyond this mountain region. In a few seconds, Gustav had gotten down from the mountain and was heading towards the next. Gustav stood in front of the 6,000-meter-tall mountain with greenish and yellow flowers surrounding the outward structure. There was another mountain on the left and right side, but those were way taller than this particular one, so Gustav decided to pick this. One question kept on nagging at Gustav's mind. Why do none of the mountains ahead have a pass? Gustav wondered with a look of suspicion. In another part of the space, a girl could be seen sprinting across the surface of a golden-colored stream. Zwee-eye. Her speed caused the surface of the stream to split open as she glided across it, forming line waves behind her. Her silver and pink hair blew backward as she dashed forward with gracefulness. She had 2 small white horns protruding from her forehead. Even with those horns on her beautiful face, she gave off a gentle vibe. Ruhr. A large black creature suddenly shot out of the stream behind. Its gigantic body blotted out a large part of the stream up ahead, casting a big shadow on the horned girl. The creature's head looked like an upside-down triangle, and it had golden scales on its 7 fins that were shaped like wings of airplanes. "It's still chasing," she said internally without looking back. The girl, who was obviously Angie, already knew that she was being chased by this creature from the onset. Almost there, her sight was still focused on the end of the stream in the distance. Swoosh! Her body movement increased in speed for a few seconds, causing the water creature in the air to fall back into the stream, causing waves to splatter across the entire place. Due to the large body of the creature, the waves that spread across the rifts upset the balance of the stream's surface, throwing Angie into the air. Angie's body ascended by over 130 feet into the air. She flipped her body forward while still in midair. She then positioned it in such a way that when her rising momentum stopped, she will descend in a vertical format. Shroom. While Angie was descending from the air, the gigantic water creature suddenly sprouted out of the stream again with its mouth wide open. Its big pointy teeth that looked like sharp, unbreakable swords were revealed. Angie was directly falling into the gaps within its teeth. Just as her body descended to the point where she was close to entering into its mouth, Angie spread her legs. Plum. Clam. The sole of her right and left foot missed several teeth pointed upwards. They directly landed on two teeth positioned in a horizontal format. She was able to find her footing within its mouth because of the creature's teeth position. Gruff. Hot breath and streams of water blew out of the creature's mouth as it growled. Angie felt the intense heat blow her hair upwards, and her entire body was drowned in water mixed with the creature's stomach juices. The creature started closing up its mouth after making that growl. Angie's legs suddenly started vibrating at a crazy speed as she squatted and leaped upwards. Swooshed before the jaws of the creature could close up completely, her body flew out of the tiny gap left. Bomb. The creature's mouth closed up with intensity, causing the air to tremble quickly, generating loud sound waves. To the creature's disappointment, it only managed to eat air. Bones were not crushed like it expected. It looked forward and noticed the humanoid-looking girl running across the water again. Gruff. It growled in anger. Disappointed by its fruitless efforts, the creature dived into the water again to give a chase to the puny-looking creature that managed to escape its grasp. Chapter 172. It growled in anger. Disappointed by its fruitless efforts, the creature dived into the water again to give a chase to the puny-looking creature that it managed to grasp. Splash. Zwarnen. It became angrier when it noticed she was close to reaching land. The creature chased after Angie furiously, but its attempts were in vain. Angie successfully reached the land ahead and kept on dashing forward for over 300 feet before coming to a stop. Gruff. The creature burst out of the stream and arrived at the shore. It stared at the creature on land far ahead with a disappointed look before turning around and diving back into the water. Angie stared back at the stream area as the creature swam away. She let out a sigh of relief as her legs gave way, and she fell to the ground. She had been running across these golden-colored streams for the past few hours and was nearly worn out. She had encountered many creatures similar to the one she just escaped from. Whenever she crossed a golden stream, she would only be able to traverse on a small patch of land before meeting another stream ahead. She had crossed a total of 13 streams during this period, and the one she just crossed was the last one within the vicinity. What could be seen ahead was a plain field. Angie rested for a while before standing up. I must not relent. I'm sure he must still be moving forward even in the face of difficulties, she said with a look of determination written all over her face before dashing forward. Swoosh. Floor 617, Watchroom, magnificent speed and reflexes. The highest so far, and from her data, her bloodline is related to speed. However, there's nothing special about speed since all mixed bloods get an upgrade in physical fitness. If this is all she can offer, then I'm afraid it's not going to be good enough. Nevertheless, she shows a lot of promise, so I'm going to keep observing her, Gradier Zenatus said internally as he stared at the part of the screen that showed Angie. He turned his face away and stared at another part of the screen that showed a boy with dirty blonde hair climbing a huge mountain top with his bare hands. Gradier Zenatus remembered seeing Gustav's performance when he passed through the previous mountain range, even with the number of boulders he triggered. This boy from the Oslov family. He really is a hidden talent. The higher-ups must have noticed him as well as the others by now. If he keeps this up, he might get chosen. Gradier Zenatus wasn't the only one that was wowed by Gustav's performance so far. Even the youngsters that passed the special test watched with a look of awe. Some of them started comparing Gustav to themselves, wondering if they'll be able to do the same. Most of them concluded that they would probably be delayed for a few minutes before they were able to cross the destroyed mountain pass. In another 4 hours, participants all across the test space were starting to slow down because the sky was already turning dark. They realized that the sky in here must mimic the original sky, and the darkening means that the day was coming to an end. Those that hadn't been disqualified yet could see that the green ball of light was now bigger, and it signified that they were getting closer. Still, they knew it would probably take another day of traveling before they could get to the ball of light because it still looked far. At this moment, it dawned on everyone who didn't realize it earlier that they would be spending more than a day within the test space. So, they would have to find food and water themselves. The candidates began to search for food and water. To their disappointment, finding food and water was almost impossible. The food was either from small fruits growing on a tree which would never be enough to quench their current hunger, while the water had tasted since it was from the golden-colored rivers. A lot of participants were going to sleep with empty stomachs since they couldn't even find any food or water source within their vicinity. Now they truly understood why this phase was called an endurance phase. Gustav found himself a nice shed underneath a big tree positioned beside a narrow river that led towards the east. It was already dark, and he had successfully gone through the mountain region a few hours back. His plan was to stay underneath the shade for the night. He was in an area that had a plain field and long rivers. He had crossed several rivers already. Gustav leaned his back against the tree and stared at the green ball of light in the distance. There was neither a sun nor a moon in the space. The green ball supplemented for them both, and it was bright enough at day and night. It should take me about half a day or close to an entire day more to get there. I could move during the night, close the gap even more, but I should replenish my energy right now. It would be risky if I fall into traps while traveling during the night, and I'm unable to get out of them due to lack of energy. Gustav muttered while staring at his energy points. Energy, 390/3200. He noticed that he had spent lots of energy points and would probably spend just as much the next day. On the bright side, I might be able to complete my dinner here while following the light, Gustav thought, and proceeded to bring something out of his storage device. Zing! A large, oven-like piece of equipment appeared in front of Gustav with a bright flash of blue light. This rectangular-shaped device was the same Gustav stored food to carry with him wherever he was headed. "Good thing I brought my homemade delicacies with me," he said with a look of delight while proceeding to open up the food-storing equipment. Chapter 173. This rectangular-shaped device was the same Gustav stored food to carry with him wherever he was headed. "Good thing I brought my homemade delicacies with me," he said with a look of delight while proceeding to open up the food-storing equipment. SSHHHSSS. A small cloud of smoke wafted out of the oven-like equipment, causing a delicious aroma to spread across the entire area. Gustav breathed in the aroma of the dishes and smiled. He proceeded to bring out one dish after the other and arrange them in front of him. The number of dishes in front of him would be enough to satisfy a family of 4. However, Gustav was a big eater, so this was nothing for him. Fried fox chick, roasted mutated devil's duck, boiled black rice. "Ah, I forgot the volcanic blue prawn," Gustav said after noticing that one of his dishes was missing after counting them one after the other. He still left food within the food storage equipment since he didn't want to finish everything at once in case some issues came up. "I can make do with these ones," Gustav said while proceeding to tear out a large piece of fried fox chick. The piece he tore out was as large as an adult's palm. Still, Gustav was able to shove the entire thing into his mouth. Crunch, crunch, crunch. His cheeks bloated up as he munched on the delicious meal with a delightful expression. Within the watchroom, Gradier Zanatus watched as the participants scrounged for food. Some of the participants were already out of energy after running for an entire day without eating. So, they just sat there looking lifeless. Gradier Zanatus shook his head as he saw that many participants were in similar situations. He suddenly noticed a part of the screen where someone was munching away a pile of delicacies. In contrast, others had already resigned themselves to the fate of starving for the night. What in the... Gradier Zanatus was speechless seeing Gustav casually munching away without a care in the world. That kid brought a food regulator with him? Gradier Zanatus saw the kitchen equipment in front of Gustav. The participants were allowed to take their storage devices with them during the test. Even if they decided to use enhancement pills hidden within their storage devices, the MBO wouldn't disqualify them for that reason. This is an endurance test. Bloodline enhancement drugs generate side effects after usage. Whenever a mixed blood uses bloodline enhancement drugs, They would be weak and unable to use their bloodline abilities properly for a day or two. The changes differ depending on the mixed blood's body structure. So, the embryo wasn't really against it for this and many other reasons. Only someone who wanted to handicap themselves would decide to make use of such drugs. What the embryo didn't think of was that one of the participants would be crazy enough to bring storage cooking equipment. Even if there was no food in it, he could prepare food with the resources in the environment. This was something unprecedented that Gradier Zenatus had never seen before. This made him wonder how Gustav could come up with such a thing. All other participants wouldn't think of doing this. This kid is really something. Gradier Zenatus couldn't figure out Gustav's thought, so he decided to keep watching him in the meantime. The following day, the participants had begun to follow the light after waking up. It was a long night for many of them since their rumbling stomachs didn't let them sleep. Some participants were able to find food before sleeping. Still, many of them weren't, and now they continued journeying towards the green ball of light with empty stomachs. Normal people would be unable to do this. But the anatomy of mixed bloods had always been enhanced compared to that of humans. Mixed bloods could go running for days without food, water, or dying. They would get weaker doing that, but they could still pull it off. Gustav had already started moving since 2 a.m. in the middle of the night. He didn't need to sleep to regain his energy points because he had already regained them from eating. Still, he decided to chill for a bit and contemplate on some things before he started moving by 2 a.m. when he could have gone earlier. As long as Gustav still had energy points, he could keep running for days without needing rest. Gustav was still in the river region. He had crossed about 7 rivers while moving for the past 4 hours. These rivers were all narrow, so he only needed to jump to cross over some of them. The one he was currently trying to cross through was bigger than the others. Unfortunately, it extended straight northwards, unlike the others. He couldn't jump over this one, so he decided to swim through it. Gustav could generate enough speed and kinetic force to run across the surface of this river. Nevertheless, after thinking about it for a while, he disregarded that thought. He decided that swimming underwater would be the best course of action. Gustav could tell that he would have to face one challenge or the other while passing through this river. He figured that whatever challenge the embryo would set up would come from underwater. So, he decided to swim underwater, where he could spot whatever obstacle he'd have to face firsthand. If he ran above the water, he wouldn't be able to do that. Another thing Gustav noticed since he got the power of the system, his perception couldn't penetrate water bodies very well unless he was within. Shruhum. Even though he was underwater, Gustav's body still moved quickly like a sea creature. He held his breath while diving faster than a ski boat underneath the river. He could see lots of small rocks and plants underneath the river as he was swimming. He had to swerve left and right to dodge some rocks that extended high up from the bottom of the river. Chapter 174. He could see lots of small rocks and plants underneath the river as he was swimming. He had to swerve left and right to dodge some rocks that extended high up from the bottom of the river. The river was more than 900 feet deep. However, Gustav could still see clearly with his God's eyes. He kept God's eyes activated while swimming because he didn't want to miss anything. He knew the power of God's eyes was limited since it couldn't see through everything. Nevertheless, it had helped him in sighting many things earlier. So, there was no way he'd decide not to use it here. Those plants ahead have a huge amount of energy points. They must be like the ones that first appeared. Gustav noticed some purplish and red plants up ahead that formed a kind of web underwater. His body could pass through the spaces within the gaps, but Gustav decided not to do that. Gustav swam upwards and leaped out of the river. His body ascended more than 50 feet above the water surface while traveling forward with speed. Gustav felt something and looked down at the river as his body traveled across midair. Delish. 6 thick purplish and red plant roots shot out of the river below towards him. Each root was as thick as half the body of a fully grown person, and its tip was very pointed. Twirl, Gustav's body twisted and turned while in midair, causing 4 pointy roots to miss his body. Due to the sudden twist, his body was directly falling towards the 2 roots shooting upwards. Gustav stretched out his hand and grabbed onto the body of the first root he dodged. Swing. He forcefully pulled his entire body forward using the root. Swoosh! The 2 roots missed him by a few centimeters. After dodging all the 6 roots, Gustav straightened his body and made himself descend faster into the water. Splash! He fell back into the water and kept swimming forward with speed. Delish! Delish! Even though Gustav had given the plants behind some gap, it still sent out multiple of its root, all in a bid to reach him. Gustav moved crazily fast underwater, but he could not go faster than these roots that seemed like they could extend infinitely. Even after crossing a distance of 700 feet underwater, the roots were still in pursuit and were slowly catching up to him. Gustav still kept swimming forward because he knew that there was no way the plant roots wouldn't have a limit of extension. Swee-eye! Swee-eye! He dodged some of the plant's roots as that shot towards him from behind. Good thing I learned breathing control, Gustav said internally. He was glad that he bought the training technique from the system and learned it because he wouldn't hold his breath for this long without it. Gustav felt going above the surface of the water would make him lose mobility. Also, he wouldn't be able to sense the plants coming from behind him. Swee-eye! 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 Gustav successfully dodged the roots repeatedly. As he kept swimming forward, he noticed that the roots were starting to reduce in number, and the remainder had reduced in speed. If only I was able to absorb energy from plants, I'd have killed this stupid thing, he thought. Gustav didn't want to waste time, which was why he decided to evade it. Fighting underwater wasn't something he had tried before, so he knew it would take some time to deal with the plant completely. After a few more minutes, Gustav had passed the range of the plant's root. He slowed down his speed and turned around. He noticed that the purplish and red roots were being retracted. When he was about to continue moving forward, he noticed something moving at fast speed headed towards his location. At the time Gustav noticed it, it was only 100 feet away. The roots had disguised its movement with a certain object. It was a black substance, and from the way it vibrated as it traveled forward, it was obvious that it was liquid, but unlike the water, it was thicker. With its speed, it only took another second to arrive in front of Gustav. Gustav felt that something was weird within this black ball-like substance, so he swung out his palm while activating atomic disintegration. White light coated Gustav's palm as it traveled towards the black substance. Immediately Gustav's palm penetrated it. Boom! The black ball-like substance exploded, dyeing the river black. SHSSHSSHHHHSSHH. A radius of over 1,000 feet underwater was turned pitch black due to this substance explosion. Underwater toxins detected. Toxin immunity has been activated. Within the dark, Gustav heard the notifications ring in his ear. I was too careless, Gustav said internally as he swam upwards within the darkness. He wasn't in any way harmed by the explosion due to toxin immunity activation, which prevented the liquid from burning his. Gustav's sense of direction was still pretty solid even though darkness surrounded him. He deactivated God's eyes immediately after the explosion. His reason for this was that God's eyes kept showing negative energy points all around him, which distorted his vision. Even though God's eyes could see through the dark waters, Gustav was at a disadvantage. The negative energy points covered every part of Gustav's line of sight, not giving him the chance to see anything. He decided to deactivate it and just make use of his senses alone. Phoom! Gustav's head poked out from underneath the river above the surface. He finally opened his eyes and stared at the darkened river around him. Phoom! Gustav swam forward after confirming the right path. In a few seconds, he swam past the affected areas. God's eyes has been activated. Gustav breathed in a sigh of relief as he spotted the end of the river over 3,000 feet away. After 2 minutes, Gustav arrived at the end of the river and leaped out of it. Tom! He landed on a small rock in front and took in a breath of fresh air. Chapter 175. He landed on a small rock in front and took in a breath of fresh air. His clothes and hair dripped of water, giving him a kind of radiant look. He had been holding his breath for more than 30 minutes. Finally, I passed that region, Gustav muttered while turning around to look back. The attack underwater happened to be one that poisoned living things it made contact with. Gustav had noticed this when using God eyes. For a moment, he could see the other plants within the vicinity drying up instantly. This made him realize just how deadly the black substance was. His clothes were still okay because the substance only affected living things, but if he didn't have toxin immunity, his clothes would probably be the only thing escaping that region in one piece. He let out another sigh of relief and turned around to stare at the green ball of light up ahead, which was now very large at this point. It looked so much closer and brighter than before. I think this is the last region I need to cross before getting to the ball of light. Gustav stared at the landscape ahead with a smile. In his line of sight was a landscape filled with rock beds. Rock beds of different colors could be seen up ahead on both sides of the paths. The path ahead was wide enough to fit 10 people walking side by side. Several thousand meters towards the left and right were other paths that also led towards the green ball of light. The paths were what separated the rock beds, if not the entire place would be a field of rock beds. Swoosh! Gustav wasted no time before dashing forward once again. Clang! 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 Sounds of battle rang out as a young man with achy-colored hair faced two machines that were built to look like anthropods. Both were up to 3 meters tall. Their height contrasted with that of the boy who happened to only be 5 feet tall. Swee-eye! 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 He dodged some silky thread-like substances that they shot out and moved towards their back. A red blur was formed due to his intense speed. He arrived behind the anthropoid-like machine on the right and stretched out his hand to grab the leg of the machine. Composition acceleration, he said internally as his eyes glowed a bright red color. Half of the machine's leg instantly lost color and aged. Crack! As the machine turned around and placed that leg on the ground, it instantly began to crack and started crumbling altogether. The machine started falling forward, but it quickly placed another leg in front to support itself. This gave the boy a chance to go deal damage to the other one. He leaped upwards while stretching out both hands, which were coated in red. Bam! His palms made contact with the head of the second machine, and it started turning old. Some part of it crumbled into dust. He immediately reached out his right hand and grabbed onto a round blue object hidden deep within the body of the machine. Glurt! Glurt! Wires and some green liquid spurted out as he ripped out the object and jumped down from the creature. Plop! The lights on the body of the machine immediately turned off, and it fell to the ground. Bang! The boy jumped backward, dodging some whitish stream of liquid that shot towards his left side. The other machine that lost one of its legs shot this out and pushed itself forward with the rest of its 5 legs. Of course, it was way slower, so the boy was able to dodge every single one of its attacks easily and arrive behind its legs once again. He reached out his hand and touched another leg. The same thing as earlier happened. The mechanical leg of the creature aged instantly and started crumbling the moment it tried to lean on it. The boy dashed around the body of the creature repeatedly for a minute. By the time he was done, the creature had no other legs to walk on and fell to the ground. The boy finished it off in a few moments and dashed forward. He was currently closing in on the edge of the forest area he was currently in. After a few minutes, he arrived at the end of the region and stared at the bedrocks up ahead. Good thing I didn't rest throughout the entire night. I should get to the ball of light after this region. His face suddenly lit up with a smile. I will be the first to arrive there, he muttered before dashing forward into the distance. In another part of the test floor, a green-skinned girl holding a sickle conjured from red energy swung it out fiercely at 3 AIs, decapitating them in one go. Even after doing that, the AIs were still headed for her, but their lack of visuals slowed them down. She conjured another sickle and threw both of the ones in her grip. Eskarywhich. Eskarywhich. They spun vigorously and pierced the chests of both AIs in front. They instantly powered down. She wasted no time in dashing forward towards the one on the left while stretching out her palm. Krakem, a dagger made out of red energy, shot out of the middle of her palm and pierced into the chest of the AI also. Krakem. Surprisingly, the AI was still moving even after she did that, but she wasn't done yet. Bam! Her palm slammed into the butt of the red dagger, pushing it further inside. Troyan. The AI immediately powered down. For AIs with incomplete body parts could be seen in her surroundings. She had successfully dealt with all of them that attacked her. She wasted no time in moving forward, leave the region she currently was in. Several hundred feet ahead, a landscape filled with bedrocks could be seen. Damn it! Even underground these bastards still came for me. A loud voice could be heard within a dark space. A boy with spiky orange hair could be seen standing on a circular piece of rock that protruded from the ground. This piece of rock was moving him forward at extreme speed, and there happened to be two large walls of rock covering his back while he controlled the walls blocking his front to part ways, creating a path for him as he moved along. Chapter 176. He was currently moving underground. Boom. The walls of rock behind him were blasted apart, and two large humanoid-looking AIs could be seen chasing after him from behind. The AIs were looking ferocious due to the multiple cannons extending from their bodies. They bolted forward with speed and started closing in the gap between them and the boy while shooting out multiple beams. He quickly turned around and stretched out both his hands to touch the walls on his right and left. Fruaberber. The walls rumbled with intensity before crumbling to pieces, causing rocks to fall behind and create another wall, while multiple spikes also shot out of the walls behind. Stabbing towards both AIs, they immediately crumbled to pieces. The instant contact was made with the body of the AIs. Boom, boom. The walls he created to defend himself were also blasted into smithereens as the AIs shot out energy beams from their cannons. Bang! The force knocked him backward. His body traveled for several hundred feet before. Bam! He slammed into a part of the wall ahead that he wasn't able to manipulate to open up for him. This part of the wall underground happened to be different from the ones he had been easily controlling earlier. While his body was being catapulted forward earlier due to the blast, he made use of his bloodline ability and tried to manipulate the walls ahead to open up for him, but it was to no avail, and he ended up slamming into it. The huge AIs were still headed towards him as he kept trying to control the walls ahead to move aside, but he was still unable to. Screw this. Looks like I have to go about this the normal way. He screamed out with a tone of annoyance after standing up. Stomp! He stomped his feet on the ground and was immediately catapulted upwards by the ground underneath. His body ascended into the air, and when he got to the wall up, it opened up a kind of tunnel for him that led to the surface. In a few seconds, he was out in the open. He landed on the ground and quickly closed up the manhole he created beneath him. Stomp! 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 He stomped on the ground 3 times, and the openings he created underground started crumbling and closing up. Damn it! The boy spat out. Looks like he'll have to continue forward on foot. He voiced out with a repressed look while staring at the landscape in front, which was filled with bedrocks of different colors. Several hours later, some participants were able to successfully pass through the previous regions, started arriving at the last region one after the other. Angie was also among these participants. She was still as energetic as ever, even though she had faced quite a lot of difficulties like the rest before getting here. This was mostly attributed to the fact that she also brought food with her. At this moment, more than 1,000 participants had been eliminated during this phase. Only about 500 were left wandering through the region of rock beds. MBO Tower, floor 602. This hall was where mixed bloods that passed the special test watched the second phase of the MBO entrance test. The second phase of the entrance test wasn't displayed to the public, so they practically got the special privilege to watch since they were considered the best among their peers. Around 50 people were here, and the students from Echelon Academy took up 35% of the population. The rest had graduated from other schools within the city and were considered a prodigy among their peers, but only 3 people among all the students that passed the special test were chosen to be a special class. The special class, just as their name implied, were the ones the MBO considered to be special, and they had special privileges that the MBO planned on revealing at the end of the test. Endrick was among the 3 special classes that were picked in Plankton City. There was also one of Gustav's classmates that was picked, while the third person was from a different school. Today was the second day, and also the end of the second phase, yet none of the special classes bothered to show their faces here. Everyone currently within the hall were only mixed bloods that managed to pass the special test. Chatter, chatter, chatter. The hall was currently noisy due to the footage being displayed on a part of the screen. How is he first? One of them shouted out with a look of disbelief. I also don't understand. This must be a dream, right? How is he powerful enough to even perform these feats? Unbelievable. I refuse to accept this. The side of the hall where past students from Echelon Academy gathered together was the noisiest. Gee, Ustav. He is way more powerful now compared to the time he defeated me. A very beautiful girl with long black hair muttered while staring at the screen ahead. Here I was thinking I had surpassed him, she added internally with a wry smile on her face. This girl happened to be the most beautiful in the room now. She had slanted eyes along with a doll-like face and beautiful long black hair. The white uniform on her made her look very angelic, but in reality, she was far from being that. What was that, Yuhiko? What do you mean by, he defeated you? A girl asked from the side. Did I say that? Yuhiko asked with a confused look. I'm pretty sure I heard you say that, the girl beside her said. You must have heard wrong, Yuhiko denied once again. All right. The girl voiced out with a suspicious look before adding. But do you believe that the person being displayed up there is actually Gustav? The girl asked while pointing at the top left corner of the screen ahead. Yuhiko didn't know how to reply and kept staring forward with a look of bewilderment. I don't believe it's him. It must be another person that looks like him. Let's wait till their names are listed after this face, the girl beside her voiced out. There's no way in hell that this elegant, charming, and powerful guy is Gustav. Most of the girls from Echelon Academy had this thought. On the screen, Gustav could be seen lifting a large boulder that was as big as a large truck while walking forward. Chapter 177. On the screen, Gustav could be seen lifting a huge boulder that was as big as a large truck while walking forward. The entire hall was in a state of disbelief because they didn't think someone would be strong enough to do this. They started wondering if Gustav Bloodline's ability was related to strength. What a spectacular way to overcome the change in gravitational force, Gradier Zenatus thought with an astonished look on his face while staring at the screen in front. At this point in time, Gustav was traversing through the region of bedrocks. Immediately he entered the region. He noticed the change in gravitational force. At first, it was a very light change that couldn't be easily noticed. However, since Gustav had a bloodline related to gravity, he was able to sense it immediately. As he moved forward, he noticed that the gravitational pull kept reducing and reducing. His body was starting to feel lighter, and when he stepped on the ground, barely noticeable dust would float upwards without coming back down. Gustav paused his movement some minutes after entering the region and smiled. He turned around and went back to the beginning of the region. Gustav approached the rock he landed on when he arrived and scrutinized it from top to bottom. It measured up to 90 feet in height. Gustav's hand was coated in a white glow as he punched the rock on specific parts, causing debris to scatter all over the place. He jumped towards the back of the rock after doing that and thrust out both palms. Bam! Immediately his palms made contact with the rock. A big part of it rolled out from the front. A massive hole was formed within the rock as the boulder rolled down towards the region of bedrocks. Gustav passed through the hole he created and came out on the other side. He arrived in front of the enormous boulder and grabbed onto both sides before lifting it. Slight cracks appeared on the parts that he grabbed onto as he lifted it and placed it upon his shoulders. This should be heavy enough to get me all the way across it, Gustav muttered slightly as he took a step forward. Bam, 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 bam. Every step he took caused a thudding sound similar to that of a titan walking across the place. This same event led to what everyone saw on the screen. Gustav had picked up the boulder to increase his weight because he noticed the gravitational changes when he was walking across the region of bedrocks. The farther a person traveled, the more their body weight decreased. Gustav could tell that it would reach a point when a person wouldn't be able to walk on the ground anymore, and everyone would start floating. He was right with his speculation because, at this point, the bedrocks were all in the air, and the only thing that could be seen ahead was a plain landscape. The skies were filled with stones floating upwards, and every step that Gustav took at this point felt light even with the boulder on his shoulder. Gustav could counter the gravitational force because he still had a gravitational energy container. However, he didn't want to reveal that. He had decided that he would be revealing some of his abilities during the entrance test, not all. He would still keep some hidden and reveal some at the right time. At this moment, Gustav could already see the ball of green light up ahead. He reckoned that he would only need to travel for about 1 to 2 hours before arriving there. Contrary to before, his steps were now lighter and hardly making any sound. However, he was still heavy enough to resist the change in gravitational pull. As Gustav progressed, so did a lot of participants that arrived in the region. Unlike him, most of them didn't notice the change in gravitational force until they had moved quite a distance forward. Some of them that noticed it earlier activated their bloodline while moving forward. They didn't think the gravitational pull would keep weakening as they traveled further. The closest participants to the green ball of light after Gustav were the same three that Gradier Zanatus felt had potential. The boy with achy-colored hair and short stature decelerated the flow of gravitational force. Decelerating gravity allowed him to travel normally across the path between bedrocks that led to the green ball of light up ahead. A red glow of light covered him as he walked forward. Using this bloodline ability sapped a lot of his energy, so contrary to his expectations, he could only walk along the path instead of running to preserve energy, especially when he noticed that the change in gravitational force increased more and more as he traveled forward. The boy with spiky orange hair couldn't control the ground below like he used to in other regions. He found it really hard to manipulate the ground, so he could only let his legs sink 2 feet into the ground as he kept moving forward. The ground covered his leg as he moved forward 1 step at a time. Due to this factor, he was protected from the change in gravitational force. His body wouldn't float upwards as he traveled further, but he couldn't move as fast as he wanted to. The green-skinned girl surprisingly wasn't really affected by the change in gravitational force. A red aura of light covered her body as she moved forward with ease. It was like she wasn't affected at all. As the three of them traveled on different routes towards the ball of green light, they had a similar thought in mind. I will be the first to arrive at the ball of light. Other participants that weren't equipped with a bloodline that could assist them in pulling through this region started floating. Since they did not have the power to fly, they lost their balance. Chapter 178. Other participants that weren't equipped with a bloodline that could assist them in pulling through this region started floating. Since they did not have the power to fly, they lost their balance. Once a person starts floating and couldn't control their movement in the air, or had become incapacitated, once they got to a particular height in the sky, something happened. A mysterious glow of light would surround them, and they would disappear. The participants who witnessed this could guess that the set of participants that disappeared has been disqualified. When Angie arrived in this region about 30 minutes ago, she also sensed the change in gravitational force. Still, for reasons known to her, she wasn't bothered. She only smiled and increased her speed of running. Swoosh! At the moment she was closing in on the ball of light as she bolted across the path that led to it. Surprisingly, she wasn't affected by the gravitational force. At the speed at which she was moving, it wouldn't take long before she caught up with the three closest to the ball of light. She would soon meet up with the others, including Gustav, even though they traveled on different routes. 1 hour later, Gustav could already see the ball of light above the ground several thousands of feet away from his position. The green ball of light was bright and shiny, but it wasn't as big as Gustav expected. It was comparable to a 10-story building in height, but it was spherical like an egg. It wasn't very bright, so Gustav wondered why they could see it clearly from their starting point. With the way it was visible from afar, he had expected that coming close to it would severely damage the retinas due to brightness. Surprisingly, things were somewhat different from what he imagined. He looked around and noticed that all the paths led to the particular area where the spherical green light was suspended in the air. Different paths were extending from every direction of the test phase, and they all led towards the green ball of light which happened to be in the middle. Gustav now understood why he never met anyone at the beginning while traveling towards this place. This was because everyone was positioned in a circular format at the ends of the test phase, so when traveling forward, they closed in on the green ball of light from every direction. The green ball of light was in the middle of the space. There was a barricade of light shining down from the spherical green light that touched the ground surface. Gustav instantly realized that within the space of that barricade of green light was where he needed to enter to complete this phase. He kept walking towards it casually. The small marbles in the air at this point were very dense. By contrast, in the area where the spherical green light was located, nothing could be found in the air. Gustav cautiously walked towards the barricaded light space. He knew how unpredictable things were when it came to the MBO. There had been a lot of surprises since the start of this test phase, so his mind was currently on the alert for any kind of changes around him. After about 10 more minutes of walking, Gustav was only a few feet away from reaching the light shining down from the spherical ball above. He finally got there in a few seconds and stood in front of it with a surprised expression. "Looks like I was mistaken," he said internally while staring at the light wall. He thought there would be some last obstacle that he needed to overcome, but to his surprise, there wasn't. Gustav raised his right foot and moved it forward to enter the space, but he realized that he came to a conclusion too soon when his leg made contact with the wall of light. His leg couldn't pass through. It turned out that the light was actually a barrier. He thought he would pass through the light barricade without any obstruction, but it turned out this was the last obstacle that needed to be passed. Calm, calm, calm. Gustav kicked the light barrier thrice with little force, trying to check its sturdiness. He still had the boulder on his shoulder at the moment as he contemplated. The MBO really thought this out? Due to the gravitational force, everyone's body weight will be inexistent. It would be nearly impossible for a weightless person to generate enough force to break through this. Even when equipped with a bloodline that can easily break through things, the circumstances this time is a bit unnerving, he thought. Anyways, no point dwelling on it. Gustav turned around while a charming smile hung on his face. He walked about 100 feet backwards and turned around to face the light wall. He squatted slightly while still lifting the boulder on his shoulders. "This isn't enough to stop me. Dash has been activated." Swoosh! Gustav's body blurred as he streaked across the ground, arriving in front of the light barrier instantly. Gustav pushed the boulder in front of himself as he arrived in front of the light barrier. The boulder made contact with the barrier first while Gustav's body was positioned behind it. Ripples spread across the surface of the light barrier due to the intense impact. Several thousand feet away, the three participants closest to Gustav approached the green ball of light. They could now see the different paths ahead that led to the green ball of light. Since the paths were starting to reduce in width, they could vividly see the different other paths that led to the green ball of light. The green-skinned girl with a red aura coating her entire body paused her steps as she sensed something and decided to turn around. On the path on her right, about 300 feet behind, the boy with acu-colored hair could be seen moving at a fair pace. The path on her left, about 400 feet away, the boy with spiky orange hair could be seen taking one step at a time while his legs were sunk into the ground. Both boys suddenly paused their steps as they noticed the girl ahead. A frown appeared on their faces as they turned to the side and also noticed each other. The three of them paused their movement as they discovered one another. Tension suddenly filled the air as they stared at each other warily. Chapter 179. The three of them paused their movement as they discovered one another. Tension suddenly filled the air as they stared at each other warily. Oi, oi, oi. What do we have here? The boy with the spiky orange hair was the first to break the silence. Teamy, I should have known that it will be you. And you too. I knew you were strong, hahaha, interesting. He voiced out with a burst of laughter while pointing at the both of them. Eck, I'm surprised you managed to make it here in one piece, loud-mouthed idiot, the green-skinned girl said with a depressed look. Huh, you little cowtail. I acknowledged your strength, yet you call me a loudmouth, the orange-haired boy shouted with a tone of annoyance while pointing at her. Who are you calling a cowtail? Do you wish to die, you shitty-haired Dumbo? She replied while raising her brown tail and pointing it towards the boy. Huh, it's Rhea, in case you forgot. I'm no shitty-haired Dumbo, you cowtail. As both of them bantered amongst each other, Teamy shook his head from the side with a look of pity. Idiots, he muttered softly before he resumed walking forward. I'll kill you if you keep calling me that, you little shit. The red ore-like energy surrounding the green-skinned girl intensified as she spoke. Not if I kill you first, cowtail. Rhea voiced out as he conjured a giant hammer made of rocks from the ground. Both of them stared at each other intensely. Just as Rhea and the green-skinned girl were about to make a move on each other, Rhea noticed something. Wait, where's Teamy? He asked with a blank look. The green-skinned girl turned towards the side to check and also noticed that he had disappeared. They both turned and stared ahead. Their faces shone with a look of realization as they discovered that Timmy had gone on while they were busy bantering. "That's Shorty," Rhea shouted out with an urgent look and immediately dashed forward. The green-skinned girl also started running forward the moment she noticed Timmy had gone ahead of them. Rhea's feet were still sunk into the ground to prevent himself from floating upwards. Surprisingly, this time he was able to move faster than before. As expected, the person who had gone the farthest was Timmy, who was more than 100 feet ahead at the moment. Now that he was close to reaching the green ball of light, he did not hold back anymore. His energy was depleting at an insane rate because he was now running. Nevertheless, he didn't mind losing energy as long as he could get to the green ball of light first. In just a few seconds, the green-skinned girl had started closing the gap between them. She was now about 30 feet behind him. She didn't look like she was affected by the gravitational force with the way she was running forward while holding onto the red sickle. Also, unlike the two boys who had slightly pale faces, she didn't look tired. Timmy turned his neck to the side and looked above his shoulder. Damn, what is she? She only needed a few seconds to catch up? What a monster, he muttered while gritting his teeth after noticing that the green-skinned girl was close to catching up. He increased his running speed, causing a red streak of energy to blaze across the ground. The green-skinned girl noticed that he was starting to increase the gap between them and increased her speed. Both of them seemed to have similar bloodlines due to the similar red energy that coated them as they traveled. However, it was apparent that they had different abilities. Damn it, I just had to be in the same group with these monsters. Rhea voiced out with a dark face as he stared at both of them ahead. He was more than 80 feet behind them. "Ah, I cannot accept being the loser here," Rhea shouted out with a look of determination as the ground boosted his speed. It was hard for him to control the ground here, so sweat started dripping from his forehead as he forcefully manipulated the ground. As seconds passed, he slowly started to catch up to them, but his body was already trembling from a loss of energy. "Hiya!" His face shone determination and fierceness as he screamed out. The green-skinned girl finally caught up to Timmy after a while. At that same time, they were about 3,000 feet away from the light wall that extended from the green ball light above. Immediately, they saw the space within the wall of light ahead. They instantly figured that they needed to get inside the space to finish the test. The girl slowly started surpassing Timmy. She turned her face to the side and stared at him for a few moments before accelerating again. Timmy gritted his teeth and muttered, "I'm getting there first." After saying this, he pushed himself forward. It became like a game of tag. The green-skinned girl would accelerate and surpass Timmy for a moment. Then Timmy would use more energy to push himself forward, catching up with her. Still, in the next moment, she would accelerate again, surpassing him. He would once again push himself forward by using more energy. Timmy's face was starting to become paler and paler as they closed in on the wall of light ahead. Rhea was already catching up to them and was only about 15 feet away when they crossed the 2,000 feet mark. They were now about 1,000 feet away from getting to the light. As they closed in on the light, they noticed a large boulder sitting on the ground after the wall of light. They didn't think much of it and instead focused on being the first to arrive there. Timmy noticed that he was running out of juice as they traveled further. The green-skinned girl had now increased the gap between them by about 4 feet. Chapter 180. Timmy noticed that he was running out of juice as they traveled further. The green-skinned girl had now increased the gap between them by about 4 feet. He struggled to close the gap, but he couldn't because he was almost out of energy. At this point, they were only about 200 feet away from the wall of light, and it would only take a few moments for them to arrive in front of the light barrier. Timmy screamed out as he coated his knuckles in red energy before swinging them towards the back of the green-skinned girl. She sensed the attack coming from behind and turned around swiftly while placing her sickle in front of her. Bang! Timmy's fist slammed into her sickle, sending her several feet backward as the sickle lost its glow. Just as she stopped sliding backward, Timmy lunged towards her once again. "I'm getting there first," he voiced out as he arrived in front of her and swung out his fist again. Swoosh! The green-skinned girl turned her body towards the side and swung the butt of her sickle upwards. Bam! Her sickle slammed into Timmy's right arm, causing it to flail upwards. She spun her sickle around and slammed it into Timmy's chest, sending him flying. Bang! Timmy landed on his back several feet away. The green-skinned girl was about to turn around and continue her journey when Rhea arrived in front of her. He swung the large rocky hammer he created from the ground towards her. Shing! Shing! She swung out her sickle twice in response, and the large 3-foot rock-like hammer was instantly divided into 3 halves. Before Rhea could regain his senses, the green-skinned girl had already jumped into the air, and her right leg was currently swinging towards his face. Rhea quickly raised his hand up to protect himself. However, immediately her right foot made contact with his arm. He realized that this girl shouldn't be trifled with. Bang! Arg! Rhea screamed out as the kick sent his hand out of the way, and her legs slammed into his left cheek. Blood spurted out of his mouth as his body traveled in an arc across the air. How is she so strong? Rhea said internally with an expression of pain and disbelief before slamming onto the ground. Oomph! The green-skinned girl exclaimed with a disappointed expression before turning around to start walking towards the wall of light. I won't let you. Timmy jumped up after voicing out. Neither Cowtail nor Timmy will be the first to get in. I will go in before you both. Rhea shouted out and forcefully pushed himself up also. The green-skinned girl turned around to face them. These little shits think they're so great now, huh? She said with a repressed look while conjuring another large sickle made of red energy in her left hand. She raised them and pointed at them both. The 3 stared at each other for a few seconds. However, just as they were about to lunge towards one another, they sensed something in the distance. Huh! Timmy and Rhea exclaimed at the same time, but just as they turned around to check what was going on, a silhouette streaked past them. Swoosh! The green-skinned girl only caught sight of silver and pink-colored hair before the person dashed past her. The speed was too great for any of them to react on time. Before they could regain their composure, the person had arrived at the light barrier. Troyan! The barrier rippled like waves as the person's body pushed through it. It expanded like rubber before the person finally passed through it. The 3 of them stared with looks of disbelief as the person arrived on the other side. They seemed speechless. All the banter and fight had been for nothing. She beat us to it, Timmy said internally with a conflicted look. Damn it. See what you both caused. Rhea shouted out with an annoyed look. Just who is she? Timmy stared at the person who arrived inside the light wall before them. Isn't that the girl who was sitting beside that blonde boy? The green-skinned girl recognized the person. It was a beautiful and gentle-looking girl with silver and pink-colored hair. 2 horns protruded from her forehead. After arriving inside the light barrier, she smiled at them before turning around and walking towards the huge boulder in front. Ah, such a weak-looking girl got there before us, Rhea said before he started moving, walking forward with a disappointed expression. The green-skinned girl also had a disappointed expression on her face, but she accepted that what had happened had happened. Timmy and the green-skinned girl also started walking towards the wall of light. When they arrived, they tried different methods, and after a minute, the 3 of them managed to pass through. The gravitational force returned back to normal the instant they phased through the light barrier. Rhea pulled his feet out of the ground and sighed in relief. The red ore-like energy surrounding the green-skinned girl and Timmy also disappeared. They looked around the space within the barrier created by the large spherical green ball of light above. It was large enough to fit thousands of people. This was when they properly noticed the huge boulder placed in the middle of the space. Just how did that get here? The 3 of them had similar thoughts as they scrutinized the large boulder in front. Who was she talking to? Rhea voiced out with a confused look while staring at the girl who got here before them. She was currently standing on the right side of the boulder while staring at the ground in front. Her lips occasionally moved up and down, which signified that she was talking to someone. The 3 of them walked over to check what was happening. You got here about 30 minutes after I did. Not bad. A charming masculine voice drifted into their ears as they approached the girl in front. Chapter 181. You got here 30 minutes after I did. Not bad. A charming masculine voice drifted into their ears as they approached the girl in front. Disbelief was written on their faces as they approached the boulder and spotted a familiar figure. A masculine blonde-haired guy with playboy-like charms was sitting in crossed leg position on the ground behind the boulder. "It's you," the green-skinned girl muttered with a look of disbelief while pointing at him. It turned out that this person looked familiar to them. "Impossible," Timmy muttered as he stared at the boy with wide eyes. "How did he?" "You." Rhea was also shocked. The three of them had widened eyes comparable to that of saucers, especially after hearing his statement earlier. 30 minutes late, they now realized that even if one of them managed to pass through the light barrier before the girl, they would not still have been able to reach the light first. How in the world did he manage to pull that off? Does he have something to do with the boulder placed here? Timmy stared at the huge boulder that was the size of a truck. It was extremely difficult for him to accept what was coming to his mind at that moment. However, the evidence was right in front of them. They hadn't noticed him sitting behind the boulder because of its massiveness. This person was obviously Gustav, who had gotten to the light source a while ago, and the girl who arrived here afterward was Angie. The three of them remembered Gustav's elegance and strong aura of confidence that always radiated around him. Inside the hall where they did their registration, no one could take their eyes off him when he started walking towards the front. He had left quite a deep impression on them, and now they had confirmed it with their eyes why he had such a strong aura of confidence. But they still wondered how he did it because, based on their calculations, Gustav shouldn't have been able to pull this off if they were correct with their thinking. "You carried this all the way out here, right?" the green-skinned girl pointed out while staring at Gustav, who was still speaking to Angie. Gustav slowly turned his face away from Angie and towards the three on the side. "And what if I did?" he asked with an expressionless look. The three of them eyes widened again. Although Gustav didn't answer, his rhetorical reply was him practically saying yes and who cares. Rhea turned to stare at the boulder and turned back to stare at Gustav. "Do you have a bloodline that gives you the ability to manipulate rocks?" he asked. Rhea was hoping Gustav would say yes, because that would explain this absurdity. He couldn't even lift a boulder of this size and mass more than 2 feet up, even though his bloodline gave him the ability to control rocks. He couldn't manipulate one of this size. It would be humiliating for Gustav to say he lifted it with just brute strength. So, Rhea hoped Gustav would say yes, but to his disappointment, he heard the opposite. "No, I don't have such a bloodline," he replied and proceeded to keep talking with Angie. Rhea was left standing there with a shocked and conflicted expression. He opened his mouth wide, but no words came out of them. They already sensed earlier that this might have been the case. Still, even after confirmation, it sounded ridiculous to them. Although they knew that the gravitational force would make the boulder lighter, the farther Gustav traveled. However, it would take a lot of walking to reach the distance required for that to happen. Also, just lifting the boulder a few centimeters off the ground won't be easy because they could tell that it weighed over 15,000 kilograms. "I could sense that he was strong, but I didn't expect it to be to this extent." The green-skinned girl stared at Gustav with a dumbfounded look. "How did you do it?" Timmy asked. He could tell Gustav's reason for doing this was to counter the gravitational force. Still, he wondered how someone would think of doing such a thing even if they had the strength. "Yes, how did you do it?" "How?" Rhea hadn't regained his composure and screamed out his question. "Why are y'all so noisy? Can't you see that I'm having a conversation here?" Gustav stared at him with a look of annoyance as he spoke. "Flinch. Flinch." Both of them flinched back when they saw his cold gaze. "This person is dangerous," Timmy said, and felt the air become chilly. "Grab." Angie grabbed Gustav's face and turned his head softly to face hers. "Don't worry about them. I'm sure they are just curious," she said with a gentle voice. Gustav exclaimed and continued his conversation with her. He wasn't going to do anything to them since they didn't really offend him. Nevertheless, he didn't like the fact that he was getting interrupted in his conversation with Angie. So, he released his bloodlust a little to scare them, and it worked. Both of them went to the corner and sat down to wait for the phase to end. On the other hand, the green-skinned girl sat in front of the boulder and placed her back on it. "You can take them off now," Gustav said to Angie. But I already got used to wearing them." I think my body might feel weird when I take them off, Angie replied with an uncertain look. They were meant for training. Now is the time for you to display your abilities to the fullest. I'm sure you don't want anything to hinder your success in the test, or do you? Gustav said with a solemn look. Angie shook her head in response. Good. Now take them off, Gustav instructed again. Angie stood up from her sitting position and started taking off her green sweater. Chapter 182. Angie stood up from her sitting position and started taking off her green sweater. She looked pretty shy, but she had enough covering underneath, so she wasn't feeling disturbed. Immediately after Angie pulled off her sweater, a short blue singlet covering her chest down to her ribs area could be seen. Her singlet wasn't what was attractive. Instead, it was what was beneath her singlet as well as on her two arms that looked intriguing. A black metallic-looking flexible strap was wrapped around her belly. Her biceps were also wrapped by a miniature version of this strap. Angie proceeded to tap 7 buttons on the strap wrapped around her right arm. Click. A loud clicking sound echoed across the place as the strap opened up and fell to the ground. Bang! It made a loud thudding sound as it fell to the ground. Huh. The trio that arrived earlier was alarmed when they heard the thudding sound. They turned around to look in Gustav and Angie's direction and were surprised at what they saw. Angie was already tapping on the buttons of the strap wrapped around her left hand. When she was done, another strap fell to the ground, making a similar thudding sound. Are those what I think they are? Timmy stared at Angie with a bewildered expression as he wondered. Angie squatted next and rolled up the hem of her trousers, revealing the same straps as before wrapped around her ankles. She did the same thing and unbuckled the straps. After she was done, she proceeded to stand up and unlock the biggest strap wrapped around her stomach. Bang! This time it sounded like a mini explosion as the largest one made contact with the ground. A small cloud of dust was formed due to its mass. She had weight straps on all these times, yet she was still able to move about at such a high speed. The green-skinned girl, Ria, and Timmy were once again shocked by what had just happened. Gustav smiled at her and asked, "How do you feel now?" "I don't know how to describe it. It feels like my body is weightless." Angie moved as she spoke, trying to get used to her current body mass. Gustav had made her wear these straps about 6 weeks ago when he started training her. At first, he started with 2 straps on her arms, which nearly caused them to fracture since Angie was very weak. However, as time passed, she got used to it and was able to get back to her normal speed while running after a week. Gustav began to increase the weight of the straps on her body. These straps altogether weighed about 8,000 kilograms. Angie would not lift something as heavy as that normally. Still, since they were placed on different parts of her body, there was enough distribution. Also, she was lifting them with her body, so she was able to pull them off after intense hours and weeks of training. "Try running around," Gustav proposed. Angie nodded and dashed forward. Thwai! It was like cutting through the air. After images were created as Angie ran around the space. Thwee! Thwai! Thwai! Swoosh! She had returned to her previous position, but it still looked as if she was running in a circular format around the space. A single movement made her appear close to 1,000 feet away from her initial position and back. Without activating God Eyes, Gustav's eyes were barely able to follow her speed. In a fight, he would still be able to predict her movements and react accordingly, but her speed had already far outstripped his. The trio that arrived earlier had their mouths wide open again. Unlike Gustav, they saw Angie everywhere at the same time. They couldn't pinpoint where her exact body was when she was running in a circular format. Isn't this literally cheating? How can a person have that kind of speed? Maybe they aren't Zulu ranked. This thought roamed their minds as they stared at Angie and Gustav. Gustav was currently praising Angie while the trio was having ridiculous thoughts. "I have decided." They suddenly heard a loud voice and turned to stare at Ria. "I will not let you both surpass me in the next phase." "Ha ha ha." Ria shouted out while pointing in Gustav's direction and laughing. Gustav stared at him for a few seconds before sitting down once again. "Okay, good luck with that," he said and proceeded to close his eyes. You little. What's with that uncaring expression? You better accept me as your rival from now on." Ria shouted out once again, but Gustav ignored him. Timmy, you're no longer worthy of being my rival. As from now on, he is my rival. Ria shouted out again. Tisich, he's my rival. You're the unworthy one here, Timmy said with a muttered. That was how an argument began between the both of them. Boys, the green-skinned girl shook her head with a look of disappointment. What is he doing? She muttered with a low voice while staring at Gustav, who happened to be closing his eyes. Let's not disturb him right now. He was at a crucial point, channeling his bloodline before we all arrived here. Angie answered and proceeded to walk forward to sit in front of the boulder. Oh, the green-skinned girl exclaimed with a surprised look. He can channel his bloodline in such an environment? The green-skinned girl was surprised because while channeling bloodline, a mixed blood needed a place with no disturbance for it to go smoothly. The room temperature must be at a particular point. This environment was lacking in all the compulsory aspects. However, it didn't seem like Gustav was experiencing any form of discomfort, unlike how it was supposed to be. The green girl proceeded to sit down beside Angie. Angie, what's your name? Angie initiated a conversation with the green-skinned girl. Glade, she said while stretching out her hand towards Angie. Chapter 183. Glade, she said while stretching out her hand towards Angie. Angie received her hand and shook it gently while smiling at her warmly. Gustav had been channeling his bloodline for the past 2 hours now. He started channeling his bloodline before Angie, and the rest arrived within the barrier of light. Later on, 7 other participants arrived within the light barrier, and some others were still outside trying to break in. Gustav's consciousness was currently within his body at the moment. Fourth step seems so simple yet so complex. Looks like I might not be able to get there today. Still, at least I'll make sure I saturate my original bloodline well enough to prepare for the time of breakthrough, Gustav said internally. His genetic transforming bloodline was currently bubbling insanely within his body. He had gotten to the 3rd step several weeks ago with his original bloodline. By contrast, he had gotten atomic disintegration, beast transformation, and gravitational energy container to the 1st step. Gustav's mind wandered to several weeks back. After Gustav sneaked into the disciplinary committee's teacher's office, he spent the next 2 days channeling his bloodline. His original bloodline was already at the 2nd step at that time, and he only managed to get beast transformation bloodline to the 1st step. He still had 2 more to channel to the 1st step. After 2 days had gone by, he headed for Delta Labs, which happened to be the lab where he sold corpses of mixed breeds. Although selling those corpses and making more money was important, Gustav was headed to the lab for a more important reason this time. Mr. Lon would also be visiting the lab, and he needed to see what Mr. Lon was up to. If he could get any clues that pointed to the disciplinary committee as the culprits of the kitchen explosion, he would know what to do next from there. He had been tapping their phone lines for the past 2 days, but he didn't get any incriminating evidence from their phone calls. The only thing he figured out was the name of the person Mr. Lon would be meeting today. Ebunalua. Gustav felt that the name sounded a bit familiar. However, when he linked it up to what he remembered, it didn't make any sense, so he decided to just head there and see how things went. Mr. Lon was headed there by 2 p.m., so Gustav had to leave school. He visited the bathroom and transformed into his alias. Gustav changed into a 6-foot muscular-looking man with rough brown beards and a bald head. His skin was a bit tanned, and he looked quite menacing. Gustav had gotten access to the city records and checked for the person he was currently using. His alias used to be a hunter, but he happened to have left the city some time ago. So, Gustav decided to make use of his identity for selling the corpse of the mixed breeds. Gustav felt that even if his fake identity was compromised, he could just transform into another. Gustav headed to the lab before Mr. Lon did to wait for him. He arrived there 5 minutes before Mr. Lon. He waited at the reception area, acting like he was expecting feedback from a worker there or something. The lab was truly a run-of-the-mill type of lab. It was a small bungalow building, and the reception area was quite small. Gustav had been to one of their morgue rooms before, so he knew that some of their equipment was also kinda outdated. Gustav sat and waited till Mr. Lon walked in. The staff started greeting him the instant they noticed him, but he ignored them and headed for the corridor on the right inside of the reception. While heading there, A dark-skinned man in a lab coat came out from that passageway and met with Mr. Lawn. Mr. Lawn paused his steps when he saw this man, and they said a few words to each other before turning around to head for the passageway. Gustav's eyes widened. The moment he saw the man that met with Mr. Lawn, he recognized him. Gustav even thought his eyes might have been playing tricks on him, so he made use of God eyes and zoomed in on the man to confirm. After using God eyes, Gustav didn't have any more doubts. "Anu," Gustav said internally. "He's supposed to be dead. How is he here?" Gustav debated internally. This person happened to be the same guy employed in the kitchen after one of the workers resigned. He was also in charge of the cooking equipment that exploded and was one of Gustav's suspects until he was confirmed dead in the explosion. Gustav remembered seeing his dead body with his very own eyes. So, he couldn't understand why the same person was standing here alive, hale and hearty, conversing with Mr. Lawn. How in the world is he alive? "I need to get to the bottom of this," Gustav thought with a look of resolve before standing up and heading towards the passageway. "Mrs. Gonlaz, I'm going in to meet Mr. Ollie for the purchases," Gustav voiced out with a thick, masculine voice when he arrived before the receptionist. She stared at him and smiled while nodding. Gustav nodded back and walked into the passageway on the right. Gustav opened his eyes and sensed that 4 hours had gone by already. Next time, they'll definitely reach the 4th step, Gustav said internally while standing up. At that moment, there were close to 300 participants inside the barrier. Most of them looked like they had run out of energy. This was to be expected since a lot of them did not eat the previous night. However, they were still happy that they made it to the end of the test phase even though they were starving. Some were still trying to break through the light wall, but their efforts were fruitless. Everyone within the light wall was seated at the moment, so when Gustav stood up, they all stared at him with weird gazes. "It's time," Gustav said internally while looking up. Everyone followed his line of sight and stared at the spherical ball of green light above. Chapter 184. "It's time," Gustav said internally while looking up. Everyone followed his line of sight and stared at the spherical ball of green light above. The next thing they saw was underneath the spherical green light ball open up, and everyone within the space was sucked into it. SSHHSSSH. All the participants, who were about 300, disappeared within a flash. The second phase of the entrance test has come to an end. A loud voice resounded across the test phase. Those that hadn't managed to enter into the barrier of light before the announcement started lamenting. Looks of disappointment, unhappiness, and remorse could be seen on their faces as they were teleported out of the space one after the other. Gustav and the rest of the participants opened their eyes a moment later. They realized that they were now in a hall similar to the one everyone appeared in when they first arrived at the tower. The number of participants left was nothing compared to the number of participants that gathered here initially, and this was only the second phase. From what they knew about the MBO entrance test, it had at least 5 phases. Most of the participants that arrived really late started rejoicing after hearing the announcement. Although they looked fatigued, they had managed to make it to the next phase. Gustav sat somewhere in the middle of the seats on the right side. Angie joined him and positioned herself on his right-hand side while the green-skinned girl sat on Angie's right side. Surprisingly, Timmy and the loudmouthed Ria sat down at Gustav's left-hand side as they waited for the MBO to address them on the next phase. Gustav wasn't bothered by their decision to sit next to him. He just kept staring forward. They didn't know that he was actually looking at something. Host attributes, name, Gustav Crimson level, 21 class. Sub-parallel being EXP, 181/200/3 360/000 HP, 9590/9600 energy, 3100/4250 attributes, strength, 65 perception, 62 mental fortitude, 62 agility, 62 speed, 64 bravery, 62 intelligence, 63 charm, 62 defense, 62 vitality, 64 endurance, 67 attributes points. 20th Gustav stared at his attributes after using the attributes points he gained from finishing the daily task. He was satisfied with the way he distributed them, but something caught his attention again. I still don't know what this is all about. So far, it hasn't given me any sort of benefits Gustav stared at his class. Sub-parallel being, the moment he got to level 20, this appeared in front of the class, which had been displaying. Since he got the system, Gustav had been trying to figure out if there were any perks to this development. However, he hadn't noticed any changes or boons. He had his suspicions about it, but he had no way of confirming what sub-parallel being truly meant with the system not talking to him. While Gustav's mind was still in a state of conflict, Gradier Xanatus appeared with a bright flash of light in the middle of the hall. Well done for making it this far. His voice reverberated across the room. The hall quietened, and everyone focused on Gradier Xanatus as he continued speaking. As you all know it, the second phase has come to an end, and you all managed to pass. There will be an assessment score for each of your attributes at the end of the entrance test. The assessment score will later determine what squad you'll be placed in if you manage to make it to the end. As of this moment, each and every one of you has been given an endurance assessment score that is rated from 1 to 10. Gradier Xanatus said and paused for a brief moment. His eyes locked with Gustav for a second before looking away again and continuing. All this will be revealed by tomorrow when you're all being briefed on the third phase of the test. When the fourth phase begins, the MBO entrance test will be broadcasted across the world. There are chances that some of you will gain endorsements from different entourages if your performance is considered great. The hall became a little noisy as some of the participants' faces lit up with excitement. However, that is only if you can be successful in the third phase. Participants also have the chance to catch the eyes of the higher-ups and get some hidden boon. The weak and talentless do not have a place within the MBO. We are protecting the lives of Earthlings from terrestrial and intergalactic forces. Show that you're capable and prove yourself worthy if you truly want to be here. Gradier Xanatus voiced out with an authoritative tone. The participants were fired up by his statement. Some even forgot about their hunger for the time being as their faces lit up with determination. You will be given 12 hours break to refresh and replenish your energy. Lodges are available for you to rest based on the number of your badges. Also, the feeding lounge is open to you all, and you can get something to eat before going to bed, Gradier Xanatus said. Your badges are also equipped with a map of this floor. No one is allowed to go below or beyond this floor. Everything you need is available on this floor. Gradier Xanatus added before concluding, your time has started, so you all have less than 12 hours to freshen up, zing. After Gradier Xanatus finished saying those words, he disappeared with a flash of bright light. Chatter, chatter, chatter. The room became noisy the moment Gradier Xanatus disappeared. Everyone looked around for places they were supposed to head to. This particular room was very large, but they could see the walls surrounding it. They began to wonder how they were going to leave. Grum, grum, grum. 3 different openings suddenly appeared on the east side of the room. The 3 openings were as large as 400 feet, so everyone could see the corridor it led to. They didn't need to be told to understand that the passages led to different parts of the floor they were currently on. Map, Gustav called out while turning his palm to face his head. Truant. Rays of light shot out of his palm as a small holographic map hovered above it. Chapter 185. Map, Gustav called out while turning his palm to face his head. Truant. Rays of light shot out of his palm as a small holographic map hovered above it. Whoa! The entire hall turned to stare at Gustav after noticing the holographic map hovering over his palm. They instantly understood that this was the method of checking out the map, and everyone repeated Gustav's action. Truant, truant, truant. Just like Gustav, rays of light shot out from the number on their palms and formed a map of the current floor they were on. Everyone could see where the openings on the east walls lead to. It led to a big corridor within the floor that was a bridge to smaller corridors that led to the eatery, rooms, and public convenience rooms divided between males and females. These parts and some other places were shown on the map. However, at the end and the beginning of the map, a red sign was displayed, which had the word restricted. Gustav's eyes squinted when he noticed the restricted parts on the map. Let's go, Angie, he muttered. Gustav and Angie walked out through the openings along with many others. Immediately they arrived at the corridor. Everyone could see a path leading to the front, right, and left simultaneously. The walls were glistening white, and the glow served as the light for the passageways. According to the map, the way to the eatery was northwards. The instant everyone was about to raise their foot to move forward, blue circles started appearing on the ground. The blue circles surrounded everyone's right and left foot. The number of circles was equivalent to the number of feet that everyone had. Everyone was surprised at the appearance of the blue circles that surrounded both their foot. However, before they could understand what was happening, the floor beneath them started moving their bodies forward. Whoa! No one was used to this. So, many lost their balance and even fell on their butt. Another reason why you have to be ready for anything within the MBO, Gustav said internally after seeing people falling on their butt. They weren't informed about this, so the MBO obviously wanted them to figure it out themselves. He looked down at the small circle surrounding both his feet. A thought came to his head, and he suddenly stopped moving. Bam! 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 3 people ended up bumping into him from behind. Still, due to Gustav's sturdiness, they ended up falling on their butts like the others. Hey, how did he end up stopping? Some of the people around wondered. Angie, who was still being moved forward, noticed that Gustav was no longer beside her and turned her head to the side to look behind her. She also stopped moving forward when she noticed him. The circle surrounding her feet rotated, and surprisingly, her body was turned around, and the floor started moving her forward towards Gustav behind. Looks like the movement is based on leg muscles and tensions, Gustav analyzed internally. The floor scans the intentions of the person standing on them and moves that person in the direction they intend to move in. Gustav came to this realization when he stopped moving earlier and also noticed Angie being moved towards him. God Eyes has been activated. Gustav activated God Eyes and stared at the floor. He couldn't see through it. However, he noticed the energy points and the color of the floor displayed when he activated it. In the past weeks, Gustav had started learning about the colors that objects displayed when he activated God Eyes. He discovered a few things, and among them were the colors of mixed breeds, Slarkovs, and humans that were different from one another. Another thing he figured out was the color AIs displayed, which was Oxford blue. The floor has an AI installed within. Gustav slowly deactivated God Eyes after seeing this. As expected of the MBO, such advanced tech, Gustav thought as he looked forward. The floor started moving forward once again as he met up with Angie. Several minutes later, Gustav, Angie, and some other participants had arrived in the eatery and had ordered their desired dishes. Eating was free, so the participants that were famished ordered to their heart's content. The eatery was pretty large. It was able to contain 1,000 people. However, only around 300 participants were left after the last phase, so there were many unoccupied tables and chairs around. There was not a single human in the vicinity except for the participants. The food was served by machines, even though they were prepared by people. On the left side of the cafeteria was a glass wall that showed the outside of the tower. They could see the outline of Plankton City from their position. It was already around 8 p.m., so the skies had already darkened. Still, the city's beauty seemed to even shine more spectacularly in the dark. The skyscrapers glowed up. Commercials of different kinds were displayed. Even small buildings looked dazzling, and every part of the city looked splendid. It was like staring at a cluster of fireflies. This gave Gustav a feeling of nostalgia, reminding him of the times he would head to the mountainside to attempt suicide. He always adored the city's beauty, but unfortunately, society wasn't as beautiful as the structures they created. The earth is really a beautiful place. Too bad that most people's hearts are the opposite. A melancholic vibe surrounded Gustav as he ate while staring at the city up front. Angie noticed his weird mood and was about to speak when 3 people approached their table. It was Glade, Timmy, and Ria. "Can we join you guys?" The 3 of them asked together when they arrived before their table. No, yes. Angie and Gustav stared at each other after giving contradictory responses. The trio stood in position with a look of confusion on their faces, wondering which response they were supposed to listen to. Chapter 186. The trio stood in position with a look of confusion on their faces, wondering which response they were supposed to follow. Angie stared at Gustav with a pleading look. Whatever, Gustav muttered while turning his face away from hers. He continued eating his food. After the short drama, The trio took his statement as silent affirmation, so they proceeded to sit in front of both of them. Why are you so grumpy? Man, you should learn to cheer up. Ria pointed at Gustav and voiced out immediately after taking his seat. Gustav stared at him like he was retarded and replied, I just don't like nuisances, Ria. Teamy. Glade. After saying that, Gustav resumed eating casually. You. Who are you calling a nuisance? Ria pointed at him with trembling fingers, but Gustav just ignored him. We should really have a go at it. I'm going to knock that pride out of your skull. Ria jumped up after voicing out. Calm down, you idiot. It's not like you can defeat him, Timmy said. You're right. Ria sat down with a crestfallen look and stared at Gustav while taking a bite from his plate. You may be strong, but I will become stronger than you soon. Ria pointed his spoon at Gustav while speaking and gobbled down the food he put in his mouth. Muscle brain idiot, Glade muttered from her position. Who are you calling me a muscle brain? Ria shouted out again, but Glade ignored him just like Gustav and initiated a conversation with Angie. What's your reason for trying to join the MBO? Glade asked. After around 30 minutes had gone by, the participants were slowly starting to leave the eatery searching for their rooms. According to the words of Gradier Zanatus, everyone had a room that can only be accessed based on their badge numbers. They followed the map to the lounge area, located on the southern part of the floor. It was also the area with the largest space on this particular floor. Gustav headed with Angie and the trio. After some minutes, they arrived in that area with a very long and spacious corridor that extended as far as the eyes could see. Doors were on the left and right sides of the walls. Each of the doors had numbers on the top right corner. The participants stared at the number on their palms while looking at the doors as they walked across the corridor. Gustav already figured out that the numbers were in an arranged format. So, he could tell that his room was still a distance away from their current position. Mine is here, guys. I guess I'll go have a good night rest, Glade said with a smile as she headed for the door that had the number 00054. Cowtail girl, good night, Ria voiced out. Loudmouthed idiot, Glade voiced out as she placed her palm in front of the door. Ria wanted to retort, but the rest of them greeted her good night and continued moving forward. Since he didn't want to be left behind, he quickly followed after them. Angie and Gustav happened to be the next to find their rooms, and they weren't too far from each other. Gustav was 00126 while Angie was 00121. As for Ria and Timmy, their numbers were in the thousands, so they still had to walk further down the corridor. On arriving in front of his door, Gustav placed his hand in front of the door and waited. Rays of light permeated from the walls and scanned the number on his palm. Catch him. The doors slid open, and he walked in. The room looked pretty nice. A bed could be seen in the middle. However, the room didn't look luxurious in any way. It was structured regularly. Gustav checked and noticed that there was a bathroom and toilet also. After checking everything out, he moved towards his bed. Map, he called out. The map shot out from his palm again, displaying the structure of the floor. I wonder what floor of the tower we're currently occupying, Gustav said internally with an intrigued look. He had always wanted to visit the tower. However, even after coming here, it still had a lot of mysteries surrounding it. Gustav was still intrigued about the height of the tower. Still, so far, they hadn't been told anything about the tower. They'll check out the training room before the start of the next phase. Gustav spotted the training room on the center of this floor on the map. He decided to check out the next morning to complete his daily task because he had no idea what the next phase was going to be about. He had thought about checking out the restricted areas so he could infiltrate other floors in the tower. He immediately threw that ridiculous thought to the back of his mind. There was no doubt that the floor was under heavy surveillance. If Gustav tried anything, he would be found out immediately. There was no guarantee that he would actually be able to pass through the restricted areas successfully. In his head, he had a 50% chance of successfully infiltrating other floors without getting caught, but he decided not to risk it. If he managed to join the MBO, he would be able to go wherever he wanted without restrictions, so he decided to focus on that. The next morning, everyone woke up to the sound of the alarm. An alarm resounded in everyone's room, waking them. A holographic projection gave them instructions to head back to the hall, where they were addressed by Gradius and Natus earlier. Gustav was among the first to arrive there because he performed his daily tasks within the training room when the alarms rang. Participants began to arrive one after the other, and in a few seconds, almost 200 participants had walked in. Once a minute passed, the openings on the side closed up. Everyone was surprised at the sudden closure since some participants still hadn't arrived. Still, that same moment was when Gradius and Natus appeared in the middle of the hall with a flash of bright light. Those that failed to arrive here within a minute have been disqualified. Gasp! Those were the first words that came out of his mouth the moment Gradius and Natus appeared. One of the things you will learn if you manage to pass the test and get enlisted is, sluggishness isn't allowed. Chatter, chatter, chatter. The participants thanked their stars that they immediately dropped what they were doing and headed here after hearing the alarm. They silently pitied those who must have been using the toilet at that time. Now, I will explain the next phase to you. Gradius and Natus voiced out next. Chapter 187. Now, I will explain the next phase to you. Gradius and Natus voiced out next. The hall quietened down after he said that. The participants perked their ears to make sure they listened to every detail. Oh right, before that, your assessment score for the endurance test will now be revealed, Gradius and Natus said while snapping his fingers. Snap. Zing. 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 Small holographic squares started appearing in front of the participants. In a few seconds, everyone could see holographic projections in front of them. On the holographic projection, a list was displayed. Endurance score was the first on the list. The endurance scores ranged from 1 to 10. Dash, I got a 6. Dash, I got a 5. Dash, what did you get? A 7? Dash, I got a 5.5. Voices of different participants discussing their friend's assessment test result could be heard. Angie checked hers and saw the score 7. 7. She smiled after seeing her score and looked ahead for Gustav, but he was far away, so she couldn't see him properly. I wonder what his score is? Angie wondered. Gustav got to the hall before her, so they were seated in separate positions. So far, only 3 people had gotten beyond the score of 7, and that was Glade, Timmy, and Rhea. The people sitting around them shouted it out when they saw it. Timmy had a score of 8. 3, while Rhea had a score of 8. Dash, she has got to be the highest. Dash, a score of 8. 9 dash wow, who is she? The people around Glade reacted with shocked looks when they saw her score. She must have been the first to arrive then? They all felt that she must be quite powerful and decided to be on the lookout for her. What they didn't know was Glade was currently wondering within herself what a particular person would get since she managed to get such a high score. Maybe he got a 10. She stared at the side of a blonde boy's face 3 seats ahead. The same question was on the mind of Timmy and Rhea. Gustav stared at his assessment score with a look of confusion. Excuse me, Gustav voiced out while raising his hand. The hall quietened after hearing him. Although his voice was low, it sounded pretty compelling and powerful that everyone turned and focused on him. Is there a reason why my score shows this? I don't know what this means. Gustav pointed at his assessment score, which had a plus sign in front of it. Everyone also stared at it with a confused expression. Oh yes, that, Gradius and Natus said with a smile. This simply means your score for endurance hasn't been assessed, or rather, it is still being calculated, Gradius and Natus said. Chatter, chatter, chatter. The whole place became noisy again after hearing that. Dash, does that mean he was so bad that his score couldn't be calculated? Dash, I don't think that's it. I remember he got there before I did. Dash, what exactly does that mean? Your performance was beyond the prescribed level for that phase, so you might need to be reassessed, Gradius and Natus added. Gasp. The entire hall became extremely shocked upon hearing the last statement of Gradius and Natus. Performance. Beyond the level of the first phase? Doesn't that make him the highest? Everyone turned to stare at Gustav again with their mouths agape. Angie smiled after seeing everyone's reaction. As expected of him, everywhere he goes, people are always amazed by his deeds, she said internally. Oh, I see. Gustav didn't need any further explanation to understand what was happening. Maybe I should have tried less. Being on the receiving end of this kind of attention is pretty weird, Gustav said internally as he took his seat. Chatter, chatter, chatter. The participants within the room were astonished and started chattering about him after realizing that he must have been the first to arrive and not Glade, as expected of someone that arrived 30 minutes earlier. He even got beyond a perfect score. Gladier, Teamy, and Rhea had thoughts similar to this as they smiled wryly. Who knew how they'd feel if they were told that Gustav also rested for several hours before deciding to continue moving. Gradier Zanatus coughed twice, causing the place to quieten again. As you can see, there are other candidate assessments besides endurance that haven't been calculated yet, he said. Everyone nodded as they stared at the others. Apart from endurance, there was also strength, combat prowess, mental capacity, and 6 others. They had no score in front of them like the others. It would seem that these assessments would be calculated as the entrance test continued. Now, the next phase will be based on mental capacity, Gradier Zanatus continued. You all will be immersed in a space along with participants from the other floors. In this space, every object, sound, landscape can either be real or be an illusion. In this phase, you have to differentiate between reality and illusion. In other words, your senses will be tricked. So, the aim of this test is to see how you lots can handle it. Gradier Zanatus added. So, it turns out there were other floors where tests were also going on, Gustav said internally after hearing Gradier Zanatus' explanation. He felt like the numbers should have been higher than they were from the onset. This made everyone realize that Gradier Zanatus wasn't the only supervisor in the building. He was only in charge of the batches transported to this floor when everyone arrived inside the tower. Lastly, you all have 6 hours to find a way out of this space after being sent in. That is the greatest challenge since the entrance or exit you find might just be an illusion, Gradier Zanatus explained. The participants became tensed upon hearing that. They never thought they'd have to go through such a complicated test. They currently couldn't imagine how they were going to be able to differentiate illusion from reality. Chapter 188. We'll be using a low-level brain inducer to send you all to that space. Therefore, it's not going to be above what your age group can handle. It's a virtual space, but at the same time, everything will be real except for what we want to portray as fake. The rest will be up to you, Gradier Zanatus voiced out. Low-level brain inducer, eh? Gustav contemplated after hearing Gradier Zanatus' explanation. I hope this doesn't end up being troublesome. The participants still had lots of questions and looks of wariness, but they knew that the explanation wouldn't be more than this. Zing, 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 zing. The hall brightened up as participants began to disappear from their seating positions one after the other. Gustav also disappeared along with them in a few seconds. When the light surrounding him disappeared, he found himself in a hall that was larger than every space the participants had been in so far. It wasn't really a hall. It looked more like a lab because tub-like machines could be seen in rows and columns that extended as far as the eyes could see. A glass wall could be seen 700 feet above on the right side of the wall. Within the glass walls, 5 people could be seen dressed like Gradier Zanatus. 2 women and 3 men within the glass walls were dressed in orange uniforms with black stripes. They had authoritative looks on their faces. One of them, with a rhino horn on his forehead, folded his arms with a frown on his face. He looked down at the participants who kept appearing within the laboratory. They all had their different ways of standing that looked quite menacing. Gradier Zanatus stood in their midst. He looked quite tame compared to the rest of them with his hands locked behind his back. Find the pod that has your number on it, Gradier Zanatus said, his voice traveling through the large laboratory-like room. More than 1,000 participants were moving around the place at the moment. The participants from Gustav's batch could see a lot of unrecognizable faces. They instantly understood that these were the participants from other batches that had tests on separate floors. The participants began to find their pods one after the other. Gradier Zanatus instructed this set of participants to go in next. TSSHHH. 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 The pods opened up, and they entered it to lie down. It closed back immediately after that, and a red bar appeared above every pod that had been closed up. Inside, the participants could only see blue and green glowing lines across the smooth surface within the pod. Surprisingly, they could still hear Gradier Zanatus' voice inside the pod. However, it wasn't coming in sound waves. Instead, it was resounding in their minds, giving them some other instructions and reminding them what this is all about. Gustav was already inside his. Being inside the pod reminded him of when he used to sleep in a bathtub. Gustav smiled. I wonder what happened to that bathtub now? Maybe they put it away. Gustav wasn't really bothered by the pod reminding him of such times within his former household. He had gotten so used to sleeping inside the hard tub that he didn't feel uncomfortable lying down inside the pod. The same couldn't be said for a lot of other participants who kept turning their bodies because they weren't comfortable within the pod. Gradier Xanatus stopped talking and wished the participants good luck as the pod began to function. The red bar that appeared on top of everyone's pod started filling up, and in a matter of a few seconds, it filled up completely. Ting, 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 ting. The red bar turned green, and the participants felt their consciousness being pulled out of them. Their head turned woozy, and before they knew it, they had lost consciousness. After a few seconds, they opened their eyes and found themselves in an unfamiliar world blazing with green and yellow fire. Gradier Xanatus and the rest of the other supervisors stared at the large lab and watched as the bars on their pods turned green. Looks like it will be starting soon. Let's get the projection of the furry world up here. One of the supervisors, who happened to be a lady with blue hair all over her face, said. Truant. A holographic projection appeared in front of them that displayed a world blazing with green and yellow fire. They could see the participants appearing all over the place, one after the other on the projection. Sir Xanatus, do you think there might be any special class material among these lots? One of the supervisors with green worm-like hairs asked. Don't be ridiculous, Valgus. Do you think a candidate with the potential of being special class will appear here? The man with a rhino horn dismissed with a deep tone. I think someone like that has appeared already. Gradier Xanatus answered with a mischievous smile. Dash what? Dash amongst them? Dash impossible. Three of the supervisors voiced out at the same time. Why would th? The supervisor with a rhino horn was speaking when the female supervisor with blue facial hair interrupted. Sir Xanatus, there seems to be a dysfunctional pod over there. She pointed at the western part of the lab. Huh. The four of them turned to the side and stared at the direction she was pointing in. Among the thousands of pods with a green bar on them, a particular one still glowed red. Check what's going on with that pod. Gradier Xanatus instructed. One of them nodded and proceeded to jump through the glass wall. Zwan. The supervisor's body phased through the glass and traveled across the air for several thousand feet before landing in front of the said pod. It says, unable to initialize brain waves, the supervisor voiced out. Although he was more than 1,000 feet away, they understood what he was saying. However, they were confused by that statement. They'll call for the maintenance tech team to check up on it. The other female supervisor with black flowing hair voiced out. I don't think there's any need for that, Gradier Xanatus said, and gestured for the supervisor with a rhino horn to open up the pod. TSSHHH. The pod opened up, and a boy with blonde hair could be seen lying within it. Ah damn, I had a feeling that this was going to happen. Chapter 189. I don't think there's any need for that, Gradier Xanatus said, and gestured to the supervisor with a rhino horn to open up the pod. TSSHHH. The pod opened up, and a boy with blonde hair could be seen lying within it. Ah damn, I had a feeling that this was going to happen. The person within the pod was none other than Gustav. He sat up when the pod slid open, and the supervisor stared at his frame from within the glass wall. Just as I thought. It's him, Gradier Xanatus said internally with a smile. A few moments ago, when the pod bar filled up and everyone's consciousness was manipulated, Gustav also felt it. His head was a bit woozy for a second, but in the next second, system notifications popped up in his line of sight. Host brainwaves are being manipulated by external forces. Mental fortitude needed for blocking brain manipulation, 30. Host has acquired enough mental fortitude to hindering brain manipulation. Brain manipulation has been successfully hindered. Gustav felt like cursing when he saw this. He knew mental fortitude was good since it protected his mind, but in this situation, it was actually doing more harm than good. He really wouldn't like to stand out much. Yes, He was planning to reveal some of his hidden abilities during the test phase. However, at the rate things were going now, he might end up being too outstanding, and he didn't know how that would end up for him. Gustav didn't want to reveal the full capabilities of his mental fortitude because he was sure they were going to see him as an anomaly. Currently, his mental fortitude was so high that he could even control his dreams and change them to whatever he wanted when he is asleep. If he had a bad dream, he could just switch it or turn off his dreams entirely. There were other things that mental fortitude had granted him. He wanted to make sure they weren't revealed. If there was a way he could reduce the stats, he would have done that immediately. Unfortunately, there wasn't. TSSHHH. Ah damn, I had a feeling this was going to happen. The instructors might need to use a high-level brain inducer, Gustav said internally while sitting up after the pod slid open. Kid, step out for a bit, the supervisor instructed. Gustav did as he was told and came out. The supervisor moved closer to the pod and started checking it out. I wonder what's wrong with this. Before he could complete his statement, he heard a voice in his mind. There's nothing wrong with the pod, Chucks. Bring the kid here. It was the voice of Gradier Zanatus in his mind. There's nothing wrong with the pod? Then why didn't it send him there like the rest? He questioned. Bring him over here first, Gradier Zanatus commanded. The supervisor nodded and grabbed hold of Gustav's left arm. Gustav was alarmed by the sudden grip, but the supervisor leaped upwards towards the southeast area before he could react to it. Zwarnen. Gustav traveled across the air along with the supervisor, and before he knew it, they were closing in on a glass wall. Gustav placed his right arm in front of himself in defense as they arrived in front of the glass. However, to his surprise, there was no collision when they made contact. Instead, their body phased through it. Intangibility, Gustav immediately recognized this bloodline ability. It was one of the rarest bloodlines in the history of mixed bloods. Plop. They landed within the small room, and Gustav looked around. He noticed Gradier Zanatus standing among the weird-looking supervisors. Sir Zanatus, I've brought him. The other male supervisor with gray-colored hair voiced out. Good. Welcome candidate 00126, Gradier Zanatus voiced out. Gustav just stared in response. He was more concerned with the words that were going to come out of Gradier Zanatus' mouth next, and how he would counter them if they happened to be unfavorable. It would seem your mental defenses happen to be higher than what the pod can handle, so you can't be sent in with the others, Gradier Zanatus explained. So, what's going to happen now? Gustav asked with a calm look. Well, this pod happens to be at the right level for your age group, so it's either you're way older, or you're just different. Gradier Zanatus said. Can't I just use a higher level pod? Gustav asked. Well, you see, there are 4 levels of brain inducer pods. The pod you and your fellow participants used is at the beginner level, which is the first. The second level isn't what normal participants can handle since their brain functions might be overworked. As for the third and fourth levels, let's not even go there. You will be turned into a vegetable, Gradier Zanatus explained. Why don't we try the second level pod? Gustav asked once again. If we use a higher level pod to send you in, it would be a violation because it's for the age group of 30. Also, it will make it more difficult for you to differentiate between illusion and reality. The whole process would be quite unfair since the other participants will have it easier. Only special class candidates can handle it at your age, Gradier Zanatus replied. Special class? Those words caught Gustav's interest. This means I'm in the safe zone since there's a set of my age group that can handle it. This made Gustav calm down. His previous worries disappeared after he realized this. Let's try it, Gustav proposed. The supervisor stared at Gustav with a weird look after hearing that. The supervisor with rhino horns on his forehead replied Gustav before anyone else could. Listen here, kid, without authorization, we can't put you in that pod, so forget it. Your case will have to be reported to the higher-ups, and you will have to wait for their next set of instructions. Chapter 190. The supervisor with rhino horns on his forehead replied Gustav before anyone else could. Listen here, kid, without authorization, we can't put you in that pod, so forget it. Your case will just have to be reported to the higher-ups, and you will have to wait for their next set of instructions. And how long would that take? Will I be able to take part in the next phase?
Gustav asked.
You will have to forget about continuing the MBO entrance test till after their feedback, so you won't be joining the next phase. You're no longer a part of the MBO entrance test as from this MO. Before the supervisor could complete his statement, Gradier Xanatus interrupted. Prepare the Stage 2 pod. He voiced out with an authoritative tone. The other supervisors turned around to stare at Gradier Xanatus after he gave that order. But we haven't been given authorization, the supervisor with gray hair voiced out. I'm giving the authorization. I will handle whatever comes next myself, Gradier Xanatus replied while walking towards Gustav. Sir Xanatus, what are you talking about? Are you sure about this? Punishments will be meted out if anything happens to this candidate because of your decision. The supervisor with rhino horn voiced out. Do as I have said. Prepare the Stage 2 pod. Gradier Xanatus replied with a condescending tone. Immediately they heard the tone of his voice. None of the supervisors questioned him anymore. The supervisor with rhino horns backed down and moved to the side. Why? Gustav asked while staring at Gradier Xanatus, who was currently standing in front of him. Gradier Xanatus placed his right palm on Gustav's right shoulder before answering. I've been watching you. Let's see if you'll live up to my expectations. Gustav furrowed his eyebrows upon hearing that and didn't respond. I can only hope this level of the pod will be high enough to transport my consciousness into that world. It's going to be a hassle to wait for feedback from the higher-ups, Gustav said internally as they waited. In about 2 minutes, some people in lab coats with weird-looking rhombus-like helmets covering their faces came into the small room pushing a white pod. This pod was almost twice the size of the ones in the large hall in front. They started setting it up with a connected device, and in a few seconds, it powered up. TSSHHH. It slid open, and Gustav went in. The pod closed up back as he laid down inside. Has it been successfully connected to the furry world? Gradier Xanatus asked the people in lab coats. They gave an affirmative reply and stared at the pod, which was currently glowing up. Red bars appeared on it like the others and started filling up. Work this time, please, Gustav said internally. This was the first time he wished one of his stats was lesser than it currently was. The bar filled up completely, and just like before, Gustav felt his consciousness being pulled out of his body. Host brainwaves are being manipulated by external forces. Mental fortitude needed for blocking brain manipulation. 50. Host has acquired enough mental fortitude to hindering brain manipulation. No. 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 Not again, Gustav said internally with a look of frustration as he saw the system notifications. The system was about to hinder brain manipulation again. Hey, system. I'm sure you can hear me. It wouldn't be sensible for me to stand out beyond this because it might cause future and unknown complications. If you could just let this machine do what it's made for, that would be the best, Gustav said, internally hoping that the system would listen to him. Host has acquired enough mental fortitude to hindering brain manipulation. He noticed that the notification paused here because there was still supposed to be another notification after this. He felt maybe the system decided to listen to him. Still, in the next second, a notification popped up above other notifications. The existence of the system shall not be exposed. I shall not tolerate entry of external forces into the host's mind. The system finally chatted with him again after several months. Listen to me. If we go beyond this, it might put us in a compromising situation. If I'm in a compromising situation, it means you also are, Gustav replied internally. If you get in a compromising situation and die, it doesn't affect me. I can always choose another host. The system responded coldly. I'm calling your bluff. After spending 6 months within me, there's no way you'd want to start from scratch, Gustav said internally without a look of worry. Do you pride yourself on being important now? How about we stop arguing and make a decision before the supervisors get too suspicious? Just listen to my suggestion, Gustav proposed. All right, go on. From what I've noticed, you don't want them peeking in my head. This machine can do that, but it isn't really trying to do that now. So, the best course of action would be for you to reduce my mental fortitude below 50 for it, to send my consciousness to where the third phase is happening. Immediately I'm in, let my stats return to normal. That way, even if the machine tries to pick my brain when I'm in, it wouldn't work since my mental fortitude has returned back to normal. Also, I won't be pulled out of the world since the machine only needs to send us there. It plays no role in keeping us within that world. It's like a gateway, so returning my mental fortitude stats normal will not pull me out of that world unless I find the exit, Gustav explained lengthily to the system. Doesn't seem like a bad suggestion, but with all that intelligence, you could only come up with this? I'm quite disappointed, Gustav. The system is still a bitch outside the pod. The supervisors started to get worried when they saw that the bar remained red even after filling up. Chapter 191. Outside the pod, the supervisors started to get worried when they saw that the bar remained red even after filling up. What's going on? Why hasn't it sent him there like the rest? The supervisor with worm-like hairs asked the people on lab coats. It would seem this candidate has a very high mental resistance. One of them replied, "What? There's no way in hell he is supposed to be able to resist a brain inducer of this level." The supervisor with the rhino horns voiced out, "We don't know, but the machine seems to be having trouble sending his consciousness there. That's the only reason we can come up with." Another one of them answered again, "It must be dysfunctional then." While they were arguing, Gradier Zenatus stared at the pod with a confounded look, him being able to resist this. Not even special class candidates can do this. What is he? While everyone was in their thoughts of confusion, the bar suddenly turned green. Everyone stared at the pod and sighed in relief a second after. Looks like he wasn't able to resist it in the end, Gradier Zenatus said internally. Check if his brainwaves are okay. Any sign of irregularity? Gradier Zenatus asked. Truant. A holographic scan of Gustav's brain appeared in mid-air. He's perfectly fine, one of the people on lab coats voiced out. Gustav found himself inside the same world he saw on the holographic projection within the small room where the supervisors stayed. As far as his eyes could see, everywhere was set ablaze. The ground, the mountain, the trees, the skies, the birds, they all blazed with yellow and green fire. In front of him was a path also laced with fire. Gustav was standing on fire, but surprisingly, he didn't feel hot or uncomfortable in any way. Still, to walk ahead, one would also have to walk on a path of fire. Parts of this projection is an illusion, and parts of it are also real. Walking on the wrong side of the ground will get a person burnt, Gustav said internally. He immediately figured out that he was probably stepping on the illusionary part of the fire. However, once he started walking, he would need to watch out for the real parts so he wouldn't get burnt. This will be fun, Gustav smirked. Just as he was about to take a step forward, the system messaged him. I shall now return your stats back to normal. Before Gustav could react to that, he noticed his vision changing. Things became clearer, and in a matter of seconds, most of the fire around him had turned transparent. He looked down and noticed that he was standing on transparent yellow and green fire. Some parts of the path ahead of him still had a normal-looking green and yellow fire burning on the ground, while others were transparent. No one needed to tell Gustav before he figured out that the transparent fires were illusionary while the normal ones were real. Sigh. So much for having fun, Gustav said internally as he began to walk forward. He thought this was going to be a little challenging, but with his stats returning to normal, he saw through everything. I guess I should just go find the exit now, Gustav muttered while dashing forward. Dash has been activated. Swoosh. He moved across the blazing grounds with speed. Sometimes he was on the left, and other times he would move to the right. He got in 30 minutes after the rest of the participants. Shouldn't we give him a little more time? The supervisor with gray hair questioned while staring at the timer on the top right corner of the room. He won't be needing that, Gradier Zenatus replied and pointed at a particular part of the split screens where Gustav could be seen dashing across a blazing field. Dash, what in the world? Dash. He's accurately dodging all the real fires and running through the illusionary fires? The supervisors were gobsmacked when they saw him. The large holographic projection had thousands of split screens based on the number of the participants, so they hadn't seen Gustav earlier. Nevertheless, Gradier Zenatus could spot Gustav the instant his consciousness got tossed into that world. Other participants showcased on the screens were moving quite slowly, because it wasn't easy to differentiate between reality and illusion. If they were hasty, Their virtual body, made from their consciousness, would be burnt to ashes. It was just like a game. If their bodies were burnt to ashes, they would respawn several thousand feet behind from where their bodies burnt, and this would waste more of their time. In 30 minutes, more than 100 participants had been burnt to ashes once or twice and had to do it over. Since the use of bloodline abilities was allowed, some had gotten ahead of others since their ability made it easy for them to scale through the region of blazing grounds. However, the ground wasn't the only thing within this world to worry about. The participants would find out the hard way that other things would give them difficulty. Even their ability wouldn't give them an easy pass when they encounter such situations. Gustav kept running across the field, dodging the fires. When he got to a particular point, he could see different participants moving ahead slowly. They heard the sound of the wind behind and turned around with a look of surprise. Dash, what is he doing? Dash, doesn't he know that he shouldn't be moving so quickly around here? There were about 6 of them within the vicinity. The participants looked like they formed some kind of group as they slowly moved forward after studying a particular area properly. Hey, you're gonna get roasted if you keep moving forward like that, one of them voiced out as Gustav closed in on them. They happened to be passing the only part that was blazing with illusionary fire at the moment, so Gustav had to slow down and move according to their speed. Chapter 192. They happened to be passing the only part that was blazing with illusionary fire at the moment, so Gustav had to slow down and move according to their speed. Gustav would have to wait till they got to a part of the land with more illusionary fires, so he would be able to take another path and not be disturbed by their speed. Mind your business, Gustav replied the person in front of him that had just spoken. What? Then why are you following us? The person who happened to be a guy with red hair voiced out. This is the only safe path at the moment. When we go further, you won't see me behind you anymore, Gustav replied as he continued walking forward. You. Before the participant could retort, something happened. Shoo, shoo, shoo. The blazing clouds suddenly started falling from the sky. What the? They were all shocked by the blazing clouds falling from the sky. They were blazing with such intense yellow and green fire, increasing the temperature surrounding the environment. The clouds falling were enormous. So, there was no way they'd be able to move fast or far enough to escape from the area of concentration. It was also too fast for them to observe and determine which parts were illusionary, so the participants began to panic. They were only about a few hundred feet more from reaching the point where Gustav would be able to move on his own. Move forward, you idiots, Gustav voiced out. His voice brought them out of their reverie. The group subconsciously started running forward, even though they knew that they wouldn't escape the range of fire. After getting to the end of the path, Gustav could see transparent yellow and green fires on the far right side and the left side. By contrast, the middle had real fires blazing from the ground. Gustav immediately dashed towards the left and started running forward. The others couldn't catch up to his speed, but they still tried following in his steps due to him being at the front suddenly. While the clouds fell, Gustav moved from place to place. Swerve, swerve, swerve. Some large chunks of cloud fell on him, but he was unscathed. However, he totally avoided some while still running forward, but they were still dropping. Some participants behind him had been smoked to death by the falling clouds of blazing yellow and blue fire. Gustav looked up and noticed a large cloud coated in fire, dropping. Its size would occupy a radius of over 100 feet, and it happened to be real and not illusionary. Gustav turned towards the right and leaped forward. Swoosh! His body traveled across the air, and he landed on the other path of fire that was illusionary. Only one person among the group he met earlier could react in time and activate their bloodline. Black tentacles protruded out of his legs. The tentacles made contact with the ground, pushing his entire body into the air, flying towards the same lane Gustav landed on after jumping. Boom! The cloud landed on the left side after he jumped away. The participants he formed a team with were all burnt to ashes. That was the last of the falling clouds. Everything had gone back to normal after the large cloud landed, even though nothing was normal about the place. Huff, huff, huff. The male participant turned around, stared at the side while breathing profusely. Even though this was a virtual world and the participants had a virtual body, everything was the same as reality when it came to their anatomy. They could use their bloodline ability, exert their strength, stamina, and everything else related to their body, which was the same in the real world. The male participant noticed that everyone had been turned to ash except himself and Gustav. That was a close one. Does it mean that this guy knows how to easily differentiate the originals from fake? He remembered the way Gustav was dodging some of the clouds earlier and the fact that he could escape because he followed Gustav's movement. Hey, why don't we work together? He turned back around to voice out, but couldn't find Gustav in the surroundings. Where did he go? The male participant voiced out while looking around. Gustav had already crossed another 2,000 feet while the other guy behind him was busy checking out his surroundings. What was ahead of him now was a blazing forest of very tall trees. He noticed something and activated God's eyes to zoom in his sight on the forest that was still more than 2,000 feet away. Whoa, that's a lot of V-red wasps. Gustav could see a swarm of glowing red wasps covering the outer area of the forest. These wasps were mixed breeds also. They had mutated and become different from normal wasps. They were known as the V-red wasps. Each one was the size of an adult index finger, and Gustav could see well over 10,000 of them. One sting from them was said to cause temporary paralysis. 2 would petrify the mind and the body, while the third one would cause the body to explode into blood and gore. It would seem the participants that needed to enter the forest would have to go through the sea of wasps first. The first thing Gustav noticed was, some of the wasps were illusionary. Inside the room where the supervisors were watching the participants, Gradier Xanatus would occasionally say 1 or 2 things about the performance of promising participants. Most of the time, Gustav would always pop up. The only problem with candidate 00126 would be the fact that he doesn't seem to play nice with others, Gradier Xanatus said while staring at one of the screens where Gustav could be seen headed for the forest border where swarms of wasps stood guard. He totally would have ignored that group of people if the surroundings weren't blazing with real fire. The female supervisor with blue facial hairs muttered. Exactly. He doesn't seem to like working with others, just like his brother, Gradier Xanatus replied. The faces of the rest of the supervisors showed confusion after hearing that. His brother? They voiced out together. Chapter 193. Exactly. He doesn't seem to like working with others, just like his brother, Gradier Xanatus replied. The faces of the rest of the supervisors showed confusion after hearing that. His brother? They voiced out together. Yes, his brother, Gradier Xanatus replied. The supervisors' faces still showed confusion, but in the next second, it turned to shock. Candidate 00126 is the elder brother of Indrik Oslov, Gradier Xanatus revealed. What? Their eyes bulged out in surprise, and they turned to stare at the holographic screen in midair. After staring at Gustav repeatedly, they finally saw the resemblance between him and Indrik. How is this? Wasn't his brother supposed to be a lot weaker than this? One of the supervisors asked. When he was discovered, the higher-ups investigated the Oslovs to find out if there was anyone with potential like that of Indrik's. He was said to be a mixed blood below the rank of F, so they immediately lost interest and only focused on Indrik, Gradier Xanatus explained. Then how? The supervisor with rhino horns asked with a disbelieving expression. There lies the mystery. I'm sure they must have noticed it too, Gradier Xanatus said with a smile. Within the furry world, the participants still moved about looking for the exit. It had been almost an hour since the third phase started. As expected, no one had found the exit yet. Swoosh! Angie dashed across a burning mountain region. Surprisingly, she didn't have to dodge any of the blazing grounds because, at her current speed, she was able to dash through real fire without getting burnt. The fire would only be able to come in contact with her afterimage and not her physical form. Of course, since everywhere was blazing, she would still need to stop somewhere sooner or later to rest. Resting meant that she would have to look around for a place blazing with illusionary fire before pausing. However, at the moment, she still had a lot of energy, so she hasn't stopped for a break since the beginning of this test phase. Shrew. Currently, she was being chased by small furry-like beings coated in fire. There were more than 1,000 furry-like beings following her as she descended from the blazing mountain. These beings looked like a combination of rabbits, bunnies, and squirrels. These creatures were small, but their eyes were glowing red as they chased after Angie with intensity. Angie had managed to pass through 3 regions since she started racing through the blazing world, and she met with different situations. One of them was where 2 silver glowing gateways suddenly appeared when she was running up the mountain. Each gateway was more than 700 feet in height. She suspected one to be a real gateway leading to the exit of the furry world. At the same time, she believed the other was illusionary. She wanted to study both gateways before making her decision to travel through one of them. Still, for every second that passed, both gateways were getting dimmer and dimmer. She had to make her choice before observing properly and ended up going through the wrong gateway. Immediately she went through it. She came out on the other side. However, she wasn't alone. These creatures started coming out in multitudes, chasing after her like they had a personal vendetta with her. She was able to outrun them in speed, but they were slowly catching up to her surprise. The more they ran, the more the fire on the bodies of these creatures kept increasing. Angie turned her head to the side to check on the creatures chasing her from behind and noticed that whenever they passed on a particular part of the ground, the fire on their bodies would brighten up a little bit more. It didn't happen all the time. Neither was it a substantial increase, but she had been checking from time to time, so this time she was sure it happened again. Does it have something to do with them making contacts with the parts of the ground that has a real fire? Angie contemplated internally. She believed this was the only plausible explanation for their increase in stamina and speed. Angie knew that they would only get faster as time passed while she would get weaker because she didn't have infinite energy. So, she started formulating a plan in her mind. Gustav always says to use misfortune to my advantage. What would he do in this situation? BRRR. 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 VRRHH. 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 This is why I need to keep avoiding more groups, Gustav said internally as he dashed through the forest whilst being chased by a swarm of red wasps. Swoosh. Swoosh. He dashed across the place, dodging lots of long trees blazing with fire along the way. He would have liked to climb a tree and use one of its branches to catapult himself forward from tree to tree since this would make him faster. However, every tree here was blazing with flames. Both illusionary and real trees had blazing green and yellow flames on them. Earlier on, when Gustav was about to enter the forest, he had to go around it. This is because the direction he was coming from had real V-red wasps positioned in front of it. While Gustav was circling towards the right, he met a group of participants moving head-on towards the real wasps. Gustav managed to pass them the moment one of them used his bloodline ability to attack the swarm up ahead. Idiot. This was the first word Gustav shouted out as the swarm of wasps came flying angrily towards him and the group. Gustav and the rest of them went their separate ways, causing the swarm to split. Still, even with that, more than 1,000 wasps chased after Gustav. This is because Gustav happened to be closer to the person who attacked the swarm, and he was also running at that moment. The swarm chased after him towards the position he planned on entering the forest from. Chapter 194. The Unforgiving V. A sea of illusionary wasps was stationed in front, which was why the wasps chasing felt even more confident. However, when Gustav entered into this sea of wasps, to their disappointment, nothing happened to Gustav. Nevertheless, they kept chasing him even after he went in. They were relentless in chasing after him. Their numbers hadn't dropped since the start, and they were somehow able to keep up with Gustav's speed since he currently wasn't making use of the dash. Gustav didn't want to attack them because of their numbers, which were well over 1,000. Their bodies cast a shadow over him from behind. If he was to attack so many at a time without getting scathed, he would need to use some other bloodline ability and not just brute strength alone. Gustav turned his head to the side to stare at the back when he sensed something. VRRHH. BRRHH. VRRHH. BRRHH. The wasps suddenly started merging with one another. They can do this too? Gustav was surprised at the sudden merging that was happening behind him. With each merge, the wasp group would become larger. Looks like I have to increase my speed, Gustav said internally and activated Dash. Dash has been activated. Swoosh. Gustav's speed instantly increased by 30 points as he moved speedily across the place, increasing the gap between him and the wasps by a lot. In a few seconds, he had left the swarm in the dust. He had given them so much distance that they couldn't be seen behind him anymore. Swoosh. Gustav moved zigzag across the forest, dodging a number of densely packed blazing trees up ahead. Dash has been deactivated. Truant. Just after Dash was deactivated, a flash of bright light suddenly appeared on Gustav's west. It was several hundred meters away from his current position. Just as Gustav turned to the side to start moving in that direction, he sensed something headed for him with super speed. Tom. He instantly jumped backward as a red silhouette streak passed his front. Sway. Bang. A gigantic-looking red wasp slammed into the trees in front of Gustav, bringing them down in the process. Skrych. It screeched loudly and came to a slight pause after slamming into those trees. It was as large as a small pickup truck, and its wings were wider than a tree full of branches and leaves. In the next second, it started beating its wings furiously again, stirring up an immense amount of wind. Zwoom! It dashed towards Gustav on the side, while opening its mouth wide in a bid to swallow him whole. What the? Gustav had already activated Dash, but the wasp's sudden acceleration came as a surprise, and he couldn't get away in time. Gustav crossed his arms while swinging the right one up and the left one down. Bam! The creature slammed into him, and both of them went flying several hundred feet backward, smashing into numerous trees on the path. Bang! 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 A trail of destruction was left due to the collisions. The large wasp looked like it was struggling with something as it kept wriggling and beating its wings. On a closer look, the wasp's upper and lower mouth had been grabbed by Gustav, and he happened to be pushing them upwards and downwards, causing a separation. The mouth of the creature was left open due to Gustav's intense grip. There was a trail of his legs on the ground, which proved that he had been sliding backward since the collision between him and the wasp. However, now his legs were firmly pinned to the ground. There was a small heap of sand behind both feet. The wasp tried pulling itself from Gustav's grip by beating its wings, but its efforts were futile. His muscles bulged intensely, causing his sleeves to tear. Grhh! Gustav groaned as he forcefully lifted the massive creature and threw it behind him. Bang! 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 The wasps screeched in pain as they kept slamming into the trees. Its body traveled backward with intensity due to Gustav's throw. Gustav didn't wait for a second more before dashing in the direction of the bright lights that appeared earlier. He couldn't help but think that it was more important than dealing with the meddlesome and large wasp. Why did it seem so weak? Shouldn't the combination of thousands of them be stronger than that? Gustav wondered. The moment he crossed 1,000 feet, he understood why. He could already see 2 silver glowing gateways in the distance. Gustav instantly figured out that one of them must be a gateway. However, he felt 2 fast objects approaching from behind. Zwornen! Zwornen! In the next second, they caught up to him, and Gustav saw that they looked exactly like the large wasp that he faced a few moments back. Of course, there was more than one, Gustav said internally, while jumping towards the right to dodge the first one that lunged at him. The second one also came after him from behind. Swoosh! Thump! Gustav did a flip in midair and landed on the back of the second one after it lunged forward. He reached out both his hands to grab onto both wings and pulled them with intensity. Schhrhhh. Splurt. Skrych. The wasps screeched in pain as both wings were uprooted from its back, and black blood came spurting out like a fountain. Due to the loss of its wings, the wasp descended towards some trees in front. Gustav leaped off the wasp as its head slammed into the trees. While his body was still in midair, the other wasp lunged towards his descending body. Gravitational displacement has been activated. Gustav's body suddenly descended with speed, causing the humongous wasp to miss him. Gustav landed on his feet, and the wasp came to a stop after moving several hundred feet forward. Just as Gustav wanted to engage it again, he noticed that the gateways that appeared on his west were dimming. They had been dimming for a while now, but since he was engaging the wasps, he didn't realize it until now. Chapter 195. Zwan. Swoosh. Both Gustav and the wasp dashed out at the same time towards each other. Just as they were about to collide again, Gustav suddenly turned towards the left. Sprint has been activated. Swoosh. The wasp passed behind him as he turned to the side, and he dashed forward with intense speed. Zwee. 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 He dodged trees as he moved towards the gateways up ahead. The wasp, noticing that it missed its target, turned around and started chasing after Gustav. After moving forward for a bit, Gustav started using his sprint, so the gap between him and the wasp increased significantly. Thump. Gustav leapt from the ground and landed on a blazing branch of a tree several hundred feet away. Thwy. Immediately his feet made contact with the branch. It bent to its limit before swinging his entire body upwards with force. Due to Gustav's speed, the fire could not hurt him since his body only made contact for less than a second. Swirwhoosh. Gustav's body traveled in midair towards the gateway on the left. Both gateways were almost faded completely, but he could still see the difference between both gateways. Both were already getting transparent as their light faded, but the right one was more transparent than the left. Thwoosh. Gustav's body was about 70 feet away when the first wasp he dealt with suddenly appeared out of nowhere. This was the same wasp he threw away the other time. It was waiting for me here? Gustav said internally as he stared at the wasp approaching from underneath. The wasps were able to accelerate at immense speed, and this one had been waiting for him to get here so it could attack. So contact was practically impossible. A moment pause will make me miss the gateway, Gustav reckoned. Gravitational displacement has been activated. Gustav's body suddenly became a lot lighter, causing him to stop descending as he traveled in midair. Swee. He spun his body, missing the mouth of the wasp and appearing above its head. Gravitational displacement has been deactivated. Combination has been activated. Sprint plus dash 800 EP. Gustav landed on its head and squatted a bit before pushing himself forward. Thwom. His body blurred and appeared in front of the gateway instantly before disappearing into it. The large wasp body descended from the air with speed due to the intense push from Gustav's legs. Bang! It slammed into the ground, creating a small pool as blood burst out of its body. Skkrwlhhh. It screeched out in pain as both gateways disappeared. Gustav opened his eyes and found himself back in the pod. Tssshhh. The pod slid open, causing a small amount of gas to escape through it. Gustav could see the shocked faces of the supervisors, especially the rhino-horned one that he sensed hostility from earlier on. Welcome back. Gradier Zenatus smiled while speaking. Back in the furry world, lots of participants had seen gateways appear in different regions. Still, due to both gateways looking exactly the same, not a single one of them had managed to pick the right one. These gateways would just appear randomly, and whenever they went through the wrong gateway, small sinister-looking creatures with furs would appear to chase after the person that went through it. These creatures looked like a mixture of rabbits, bunnies, and squirrels. However, they looked a lot more menacing with red glowing eyes. They would never stop chasing their prey until they had got them and devoured their entire body till there was nothing left. After this, the participant would respawn thousands of feet behind where they had fallen and start traveling forward once again. At least 200 participants had fallen to this, and not a single one of them had been able to outrun these creatures. Because the farther they pursued, the faster they became. At the moment, only one person had managed to outrun the creatures for so long, and that was Angie. Angie had run down from the mountain she was being chased on earlier. She was now running on a path that was in the middle of two large mountains. The path was also blazing with green and yellow fire. Numerous numbers of furry-like creatures chased after her from behind. Thwoosh. Angie was currently moving at a speed that couldn't be followed with the naked eyes, yet the creatures were able to keep up with her. Looks like it's time for me to use it, Angie said internally as her eyes' color suddenly changed to silver. A third horn suddenly sprouted from her forehead. Kid, how did you do it? The rhino horn supervisor asked with a look of confusion. Gustav shrugged his shoulders and climbed out of the pod. You went in there later than everyone but still came out earlier, he added with a suspicious gaze. What's wrong with that? Gustav asked with an undisturbed expression. You are. He was about to continue when the people on lab coats and helmets interrupted. Now, Sir Nolan, we have to run tests for any abnormalities within his brain, so please refrain from disturbing him. The supervisor with the rhino horn backed down after hearing that. Still, he stared at Gustav with a suspicious look. The other supervisors were just as astonished. They watched as the people in lab coat placed two circular objects on the side of Gustav's head. A diagram appeared in front of them, and they checked it out for a few minutes before taking the button off his head. He's perfectly fine. There's not a single sign of brain strain, one of them voiced out before proceeding to leave the room with the others. What the? Not even the special class candidates can make use of this pod without suffering one temporary brain strain or the other, the male supervisor with worm-like hairs said with a look of astonishment. The supervisors couldn't count how many times they had been wowed by Gustav's feats in the last 30 minutes. Chapter 196. The supervisors couldn't count how many times they had been astonished by Gustav's feats in the last 30 minutes. When they watched his battle with the wasps, they realized that he couldn't even be compared to his brother. Looks like the big brother is better than the little brother. But how? The female supervisor with blue facial hairs said with a surprised expression. Looks like they already figured it out, Gustav said internally upon hearing that as he stared at the supervisors with a calm look. I don't have a brother, he replied. What do you mean by the? The male supervisor that leapt through the glass earlier didn't get to finish his statement before Gradier Xanatus interrupted. Now, let's not bother the young lad. He passed the test, so he will be sent back to the waiting room on floor 602, he added. The other supervisors nodded in response. You will meet others that passed the special test there. So please be nice, Gradier Xanatus said to Gustav. We'll try, Gustav replied while putting his arm in his pocket. Gradier Xanatus smiled and snapped his finger. Zing! A flash of bright light covered Gustav, and he disappeared in the next minute. Have you all forgotten your tasks as supervisors of this branch test location? Gradier Xanatus said with a solemn expression on his face. The supervisors showed a remorseful expression after hearing Gradier Xanatus reprimand them. Gradier Xanatus turned to stare at the holographic split screens after saying that. His eyes went from screen to screen checking out different participants that were still undergoing the third phase. His eyes slightly widened as he noticed something. That girl? The other supervisors followed his line of sight and noticed the same. Gustav reappeared in a large hall where young adults in white clothing could be seen seated. They were all staring at the huge holographic projection in front before he arrived. Gustav arrived. Everyone turned to the side to stare at him. Chatter, chatter, chatter. Dash, is that him? Dash, oh my. He looks so out of this world. Dash, he is crazily good-looking but also intimidating in person. Dash, I can't believe he passed the third phase in less than an hour. Amid the discussions about himself, Gustav walked forward gracefully, attracting everyone's attention even more. Some of the girls were blushing while staring at Gustav's extremely charming and confident looks. Most of the boys were feeling jealous, especially those that also graduated from Echelon Academy. They couldn't wrap their heads around the fact that he was able to perform feats they couldn't, especially after remembering how he used to be the trash of Echelon Academy. The question all of them had on their minds at the moment was, what caused such a change? Gustav could see his former classmates seated at a particular spot together behind. Losers will always stick together, he muttered with a look of disinterest. Yuhiko stared at him from her seating position, hoping he would throw her a glance or two. However, to her disappointment, Gustav didn't even bother looking in their direction. He moved towards the front and picked a seat there. The participants on that line only stared at him. Some wanted to initiate a conversation, but didn't know how to. Oh, she seems to be using it, Gustav muttered while staring at the holographic projection displaying the participants within the furry world. On the top left corner of the projection, a whitish wave could be seen surrounding Angie's figure as she dashed across the place. The others within the room also noticed this part of the projection and wondered who she was. This is because they couldn't see her looks properly due to the whitish wave surrounding her. Angie had already passed the mountain regions in the furry world, and now she was running across a plain field. Flumsh! Her body sliced through the air, generating massive gusts of wind due to her intense speed. The whitish wave surrounding her continued to increase in size as she ran. Her current speed was so fast that the creatures chasing behind her couldn't follow her speed a few seconds after she activated this form. She already left them in the dust. After running forward for one more minute, Angie performed a surprising action. She turned around and started running back in the direction she came from. This action surprised everyone that was watching. They wondered why she would be heading back in the direction of those creatures after escaping them. The whitish wave surrounding her had now covered a radius of more than 100 feet as she closed in on the thousands of furry-like creatures ahead. Gradier Xanatus and the other supervisors already had an idea of what she would do. Still, no one knew what her end goal was. Even Gustav had no idea of what her end goal was, even if he knew what she was planning at the moment. Angie closed in on the creatures, with the whitish wave surrounding her expanding more and more. The creatures already noticed her approach and crazily lunged towards her. Immediately Angie arrived in front of them. They leapt upwards towards her. Angie kept running till she arrived in the midst of the thousands of creatures. They bared fangs and swung out their claws as they descended from the air upon her. Release! Angie voiced out. The creatures in mid-air suddenly felt a sense of crisis as their furs stood in fear, but it was too late. Shruhumum! The whitish wave that had been accumulating around her suddenly burst forth from her body, spreading across the surroundings. It slammed forcefully into the creatures within the vicinity, sending them flying into the distance with broken bones and disfigured looks. The whitish wave kept on spreading, disintegrating a lot of things in the surroundings until it covered a radius of more than 1,000 feet. By the time it finished blasting outwards from her body, only the bodies of the dead furry creatures could be seen in the vicinity. Piles upon piles of corpses stacked up in one another could be seen in different parts of the surroundings. Chapter 197. By the time it finished blasting outwards from her body, only the bodies of dead furry creatures could be seen in the vicinity. Piles upon piles of corpses stacked upon one another could be seen in different parts of the surroundings. Within the hall, everyone had their mouths wide open after witnessing what had just occurred. The environs were full of destruction. Angie could be seen standing in place while holding onto something underneath her left armpit. They couldn't understand how someone they gave so little attention thinking she was ordinary happened to be one of the most powerful participants. Even the supervisors were just as surprised. Gradier Xanatus had taken notice of Angie from the previous test and calculated that she had to be the fastest participant. However, speed was something that every mixed blood would have as long as they kept increasing in strength. So, he was hoping she would have something else up her sleeves. Now that he saw this, he had no doubt that Angie had potential. Looks like she is able to accumulate that whitish force when the kinetic energy generated from her speed reaches a particular level, Gradier Xanatus muttered with a look of delight. Also, from the looks of things, she can only discharge it while running. She seems to be in control of the ability to. Even though the kinetic energy can be accumulated to a particular amount, it's still a very good ability, the other female supervisor with black, flowing hair stated lengthily. She is a prodigy, the other male supervisor with worm-like hairs added. But what is her reason for grabbing hold of one of them? The supervisor with rhino horn on his forehead asked with an inquisitive look. The supervisor stared at the screen where Angie could be seen holding onto one of the furry creatures. This particular one was still alive, unlike the rest in the vicinity. I guess we shall see, Gradier Xanatus muttered. Within the furry world, Angie held onto one of the creatures that were chasing her earlier. This one was injured, and the fire that was initially on its body had gone out. Angie had grabbed onto this particular one when she was in their midst before she released the whitish wave of energy surrounding her. It stared at her with a timid look as she held onto it tightly. The red glowing eyes that looked intimidating earlier were now nowhere to be found. Angie turned around and started moving forward. Her third horn reduced in size and went back into her forehead after a few seconds. Towards her northeast was a plateau landscape. Swoosh! She moved speedily in that direction while holding onto the scared creature. This time she was making use of her normal speed. She was headed towards a particularly high ground area that was rectangular shaped from her location. Of course, this high ground was also blazing with green and yellow fire, including the path that led to it. Angie ran for about 10 miles before reaching that particular high ground. Her reason for heading there was because she noticed a swarm of flies surrounding that particular high ground. On a closer look, they were wasps similar to the ones Gustav dealt with before finishing the test. Angie had also come into contact with these wasps when she was climbing up that mountain region earlier on. So, she had a feeling that these wasps were always in regions where a gateway would appear. She didn't plan on going back to that mountain region to wait for another gateway because she had already left that far behind. She made the right decision by not going back there because a gateway will never appear in that particular region again after a person went through the illusionary one. The regions that had Vired wasps guarding them were where the illusionary and real gateways often appeared. Angie once again made the right decision by deciding to travel there. Angie ran from the bottom of the highland plateau across the diagonal surface that led to the top. It was only about 200 meters in height. Swoosh! She closed in on the top in a few seconds and could already see the wasps positioned at the top area. Zwarnen! Her speed increased explosively, and she dashed through the sea of wasps, arriving at the top of the highland plateau. The wasps knew that a silhouette just streaked past them. Still, after looking around, they couldn't find anyone around the vicinity because Angie's speed was just too godlike for them to follow. She had already given them a gap of more than 3,000 feet after passing through their midst. Atop this highland, trees and plants of different kinds could be seen in the surroundings. Everything was still blazing with fire, so Angie didn't pause for a moment. The top of this highland was as large as a small island, and the temperature was really high. After a few seconds of running, Angie could see some participants in the distance. These participants were a group of 4 that didn't move from their position. They surrounded a small tree and stood in place. They looked like they were waiting for something. Angie decided not to approach them for now. Instead, she kept moving around the vicinity, checking for any abnormalities. She moved from place to place across the top of the highland for about 10 minutes. When she didn't notice anything, she started thinking that the gates weren't going to appear. Nevertheless, she kept circling around the top. After another 20 minutes went by, Angie was already thinking of leaving the region when a flash of bright silver light appeared towards the far east of her current position. Swoosh! Angie quickly dashed in that direction. In a few seconds, she arrived back at where she found those group of participants earlier. Jack, have you figured out which one is the illusion? One of the participants asked a boy in a full blue bodysuit. Chapter 198. No, we'll have to go through one of them also. After this, I'll have studied enough to figure out the difference. The boy in full blue bodysuit replied as they moved forward. Do you still have enough juice to take us all on a jump? One of them asked again, and the boy replied by nodding. Ahead of them were 2 glowing silver gateways. It would seem these participants could pinpoint the location where the gateways appeared. From their conversation, Angie already deduced that they planned on entering one of the gateways blindly. Swoosh! She quickly dashed forward and arrived in front of the group. The group paused their movement and stared at her with suspicious gazes. She finally placed the furry creature that had been in her arms all this time on the ground several feet in front of the 2 gateways. Hey, who the hell are you? Get out of our way! A girl in a pink outfit shouted out. Angie turned around and stared at them. If you want to finish the test now, you can follow me, Angie said and proceeded to look forward again. Hey, you, why would we follow you? The girl behind shouted out again, but Angie ignored her and focused on the furry creature she placed on the ground. The creature's body erupted in flames once again as it started moving forward towards the gateway on the right. The participants behind were about to attack Angie, so she could get out of the way. Immediately, Angie determined that the furry creature was moving towards the gateway on the right. She dashed towards the gateway on the left. They were surprised at her sudden action and were unable to react until she arrived in front of the gateway on the left. Dash, stop her. Dash, she's going to ruin everything. Despite their shouting, no one was fast enough to stop her. The boy in full blue bodysuit disappeared and reappeared in front of the gateway, but it was too late. Angie had gone right through it. The furry creature she put on the ground was still moving forward towards the gateway on the left. Both gateways were already starting to dim. "Come on, we have to get out of here," the boy in full blue bodysuit shouted out. The rest of the group ran forward to meet him, but that was when they noticed something. Guys, those creatures haven't come out." Also, that girl didn't appear on the other side after going through the gateway. She immediately disappeared after going through this gateway. They all turned to stare at the furry creature that was still moving towards the gateway on the right. They recognized it as one of the creatures that constantly flooded out of the illusionary gateways. That means this particular gateway is real. They realized this in the next moment. With no further ado, the group quickly went through the gateway. Within the hall where lots of pods were situated, a few pods opened up in different parts of the large room. TSSHHH. 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 At the same time Angie finished, some other participants also finished alongside her. The group she left behind also awoke several seconds after she did. They climbed out of their pods and stared at the glass wall above, on the east side of the hall. "Congratulations on passing the third phase. You shall now be transported to the waiting room." Gradier Zenatus' voice reverberated across the room before the participants all disappeared with a flash of bright light. "That was a really smart move, Candidate 00121. Gradier Zenatus said as he stared at the hall through the glass wall for a few seconds before turning to face the holographic projection once again. "Let's see what the others have in store." Within the hall on floor 602, about 7 participants appeared. Angie was among the 7, as well as Glade, the green-skinned girl. They didn't see each other when they were in the hall earlier. Still, they noticed one another the instant they appeared within the hall. "I see you're also among the ones who finished first again," Glade said with a smile. "The same could be said about you," Angie replied with a smile as they walked towards the sitting area. The group that followed after Angie when she went into the gateway approached her. "We're sorry for earlier." They apologized for almost attacking her and also thanked her for her help. Angie, of course, held no grudge towards them and smiled dismissively when they apologized. "What of Gustav? He didn't get finished yet?" Glade asked as they approached the sitting area. "He's over there." Angie pointed at the front where Gustav was in the sitting area, crossing his legs with his face turned towards the side. "He didn't arrive with us." "That means he was first again?" Glade voiced out with a bewildered expression. "Naturally, hi. Angie giggled sweetly after replying as they walked towards Gustav's seating position. The participants that had just arrived were feeling intimidated at the sight of the people on white. They recognized some of them and instantly realized that this must be the batch from different schools within the city that passed the special test. Some of them didn't even have the guts to sit on the same row with them and proceeded to find an unoccupied row. However, Gustav, Angie, and Glade didn't even bother about that. They were currently seated together at the front, where these students packed themselves. They didn't look disturbed or intimidated in any way. In fact, those sitting beside them were the ones who looked intimidated. "You did well, Angie," Gustav praised her with a smile. "Oh no, it was nothing. Compared to you, I'm still lacking," Angie replied with a bashful expression. "Don't sell yourself short," Gustav said once again while turning to stare at her. Angie's ears turned red as she noticed his glance. Are they like a couple, or what? Glade was starting to feel like the third wheel around them. "How did you think of using that creature as a means of differentiating between the real and fake gateway?" Gustav asked with a look of amazement. "You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.